Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, a second straight night without U.S. strikes on Iran, as the White House is reportedly concerned about the size of its weapons stockpiles. New details and the impact on rising oil and gas prices.
And 100 days to go until the midterm elections. Democrats hoping to win back the House and Senate this November with the focus on a key matchup in Maine.
We have a party to unite, we have a movement to build, and we have a senator to defeat.
And ever feel like you need a vacation from your vacation? The new trend for luxury getaways, making sure you get plenty of R&R when you're out of office. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We're coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We are here, as always, with Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, July 26th. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across all our Bloomberg platforms on radio, TV, streaming, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. Do you ever need a vacation from your vacation?
You know, I may have claimed to need that once or twice
Fair
before.
enough.
Interesting morning shaping up here, as we mentioned at the top. A second straight night without U.S. strikes on Iran. We're seeing Iran kind of saying the same thing this morning. News just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. They have said the same thing. So some sort of pause or cessation here, and we'll see how long that lasts. Again, diplomatic route does seem like it's kind of dry.
That's right. But there is some new reporting as to what might be driving that pause, at least on the U.S. side. And we're going to dig into that in just a second. But first, let's go to Lisa with the headlines.
You got it. And we're starting with tragedy in Berlin after a van drove into a crowd during the German capital's LGBTQ plus parade. One person was killed, at least 16 injured. Police are searching for a suspect who they say has ties to Islamic groups. Hundreds of thousands of people who had come to take part in Christopher Street Day, one of Europe's largest LGBTQ plus celebrations. Also in Europe, French firefighters and military crews, they continue to battle fast-moving wildfires in southwest France as shifting winds drive it into new areas. French military personnel are supporting relief operations alongside healthcare workers assisting evacuees. More than 300,000 people have been displaced in parts of France and Spain this week. And those fast-moving fires have had an impact on the final day of the Tour de France. Today's Stage 21 will now be shorter, about 55 miles, down from just over 82. It's due to a lack of security officials who have been deployed to fight the blazes. Now, the 113th edition of the race lasted 3 weeks, starting on July 4th in Barcelona, Spain. Well, from wildfires to a typhoon. Typhoon Newell made landfall today in southern China, bringing strong winds and heavy rain to the region. More than 70,000 people have been relocated and over 300 emergency shelters are set up. Classes, work, production, transportation, and businesses have all been suspended. Back here at home, Maine Democrats officially picked Troy Jackson as their new U.S. Senate nominee. That's after previous pick Graham Plattner dropped out. Jackson spoke to the crowd at a special convention in Bangor.
There is a place in this campaign for all of you. There is work for you in this movement. And I will spend every day, now through November, earning that trust.
Jackson is a fifth-generation logger and former Maine Senate president. Jackson will take on five-term Republican Susan Collins, who has held her seat, even though a GOP presidential candidate hasn't won Maine in nearly 40 years. Well, to the war in Iran, where the U.S. has paused its almost 2-week run of strikes against Iran for a second night. And that's raising further questions over President Donald Trump's war strategy. The New York Times reporting that President Trump and his advisors, they're concerned that the war, well, it could drain the already diminished stores of Patriot anti-missile interceptors and other air defense weapons in the region. But tensions are still high near a global energy choke point in the southern Red Sea due to fighting between Yemen's Houthi militants and Saudi Arabia. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Becca Wasser, our colleague at
Lisa.
Bloomberg Economics, writing about this as well, the concern about stockpiles and sort of what that means about how much the U.S. could ratchet up or ratchet back.
It's really interesting because the president had a phone call with a French journalist and said he absolutely is prepared to go back to all-out war. But the fact that these munition supplies could be prescribing policy, I think, is really significant. And I think we're going to get into that shortly. So thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. Mm-hmm. As Lisa mentioned, President Trump is reportedly holding off on major escalation against Iran. As the New York Times reports this morning, one of the major reasons is due to the critical shortage in the U.S. Interceptor stockpile, but also the administration being concerned about possibly expanding the war throughout the Middle East.
This new information comes just one day after President Trump said this in the Oval Office.
Look, we're talking to them right now. I think they're getting more and more serious as the days go by, for maybe the obvious reason. But we are talking to them right now. Look, there are two ways. I consider that the smarter way, but The other is probably the easier way, doing what we're doing. And we can take that to a much higher level if we want to. You know, we're prepared to do that, as you know. We're locked and loaded.
Joining us now are Bloomberg's breaking news editor in Israel, Elisa Odenheimer, and Bloomberg White House correspondent Courtney Subramanian. And Courtney, let me start with you on this Sunday morning and just get your sense of the meaning behind this pause. The White House pause, yes, the Iranian one as well. Do we have any sense of what's being considered within the White House right now and why we've seen a stop after 13 consecutive days of U.S. strikes?
Yeah, well, the concerns over the Patriot interceptors and other defense munitions have been ongoing throughout this war, and recent escalations obviously only exacerbated that. I asked the White House yesterday about this and got a statement from Communications Director Stephen Chung saying that the president, quote, has always been consistent in saying he prefers a diplomatic solution, but he continues to retain all the options if Iran continues terrorist activities in the Strait of Hormuz or against allies, and it would be wise for Iran to work towards a negotiated deal. Otherwise, they will know what will happen. But I did speak to a Trump ally this week close to the White House who said, you know, he pointed out that Trump could start and stop this war for months at his convenience. And while there are these concerns with defense weapons, he has more financial flexibility than people believe because of money allocated from the reconciliation package of 2025. And he's about to get another $60 billion boost to replenish stockpiles. But of course, the president is growing more frustrated with this, seemingly stalemate at this point. He knows the risks of a larger war, and he is facing a lot of pressure, both at home and especially among Gulf allies in the region, as we see this new front open in the Red Sea.
Courtney, I want to talk to you about those allies, not just in the Gulf, but even in Europe now, it seems, because there's a new threat from the IRGC spokesperson this morning saying any nation, including the UK or Persian Gulf states that supports the United States in a war, will become a legitimate target. Recently, American B-1 bombers used British airfields. If they cooperate, they will be our definite and legitimate target. We have a specific scenario for every situation. I mean, I'm assuming the hope here is that Iran will put pressure on U.S. allies to then pressure the U.S. to scale back. But it seems to me like it could also have the opposite effect. Trump has been very mad at EU allies, NATO allies, for not helping him secure the Gulf. If Iran were to attack directly British military bases, European military bases, it seems like that could get them into the conflict and widen the conflict throughout the Middle East.
Certainly. I mean, again, I think the president, as he said on Friday in the Oval Office, as he said in various public speeches, they have a couple different ways this can go. He, is obviously trying to pressure Iran to come to the table and return to diplomacy. But there are real risks here with getting more countries involved in this war, and it seemingly has no end in sight. There's great frustration, of course, within this administration about where things are at. One thing I had been told consistently over the last few months was that Republicans had hoped this would wrap by this point because of the midterm elections in November and because of some of the messaging they have to take home. So, increasingly, as we see more nations get wrapped up into this, I think the president is under immense pressure to find some sort of solution to return to the negotiating table.
And Elisa, thank you for joining us. Your first time. We appreciate you coming on. In that same statement, the IRGC also issues new threats to Israel, saying by provoking the U.S. By provoking the U.S. president and providing false information, Israel wants to keep the United States in the region and advance its own goals using American power. I know this is new, so I'm assuming we haven't heard a reaction yet from the Israeli government. We haven't seen Israel striking Iran directly in quite some time. What is the strategy here, and what is the position of the Israeli government on whether they want this conflict to go back up and kind of eradicate this regime or go back to the negotiating table? I know Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very critical of those negotiations.
Yes, that's true. Well, Netanyahu is going to be traveling to the U.S. this week, leaving tomorrow for Washington. And according to reports here, he's going to be presenting President Trump with intelligence information, which is showing that Iran has been working on recovering its nuclear weapons program. And that is really what is Israel's greatest concern, the nuclear weapon program plus the ballistic missile program. At the moment, the fighting, Israel hasn't been involved at all in the past few weeks in the fighting with Iran. It does say that if attacked, it will respond forcefully. But the Hormuz situation, even if it is solved, that doesn't solve Israel's basic problem with Iran.
Just to put up a poll here, a recent poll here from Fox News. It looks like the question was, how do you feel about military action in Iran to the general electorate? It seems like 56% oppose that. And Courtney, on that note, I want to go to you and kind of get a sense of the importance of the meetings the president's going to have this week. Yes, the kind of galvanizing factor here is his funeral for Lindsey Graham, the late senator from South Carolina, but this is going to draw a lot of leaders from around the world, given the kind of interventionist nature of Lindsey Graham's attitude toward foreign policy. So yes, Benjamin Netanyahu will be there. We understand President Zelenskyy is going to make the trip as well. How is the White House framing or looking at the importance of this week and the meetings that are going to happen, kind of complementary to the funeral that's going to take place in two parts, one in South Carolina and the other in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, it's increasingly becoming a defining feature of his presidency. The White House hasn't quite seemingly figured out messaging. I mean, there's great frustration with the message that Iran has been degraded, yet here we are still fighting. You saw last week the president, went to Georgia to campaign for the midterms, but started the morning by receiving the dignified transfer of 4 service members who were killed in the recent strikes and escalations. So this is something that the White House has decided they don't really need to message with the American people. I mean, the president has continually said, we're winning. They want to make a deal. They're not ready to make a deal, but they will. And this is something that I think we would expect him to speak to Zelenskyy, Netanyahu, and all these people he'll be seeing for Senator Graham's funeral. One thing I was told after the sudden death of Senator Graham was there is great concern about what the party looks like without him because of his stance on Iran, and how close he was to the president in terms of advising him on this conflict. So, I do think we'll hear a lot more as the president meets with some of these world leaders who are arriving for the senator's funeral.
Lisa, of course, one of those leaders, as you just heard Courtney mention, will likely be Prime Minister Netanyahu. And obviously, they're going to talk about Iran. They're going to talk about the various conflicts in the region. But I wonder what your take is on what will be said about this proposed nuclear deal the U.S. is entering into, or possibly entering into, with Saudi Arabia. One of the caveats that seems to have happened possibly after the ink was maybe still wet, but on the way to drying for that deal, was you saw President Trump come out and say, well, this will only happen if Saudi enters the Abraham Accords. Now, there was a point several years ago when Saudi and Israel were fairly close to normalizing relations, but a lot has happened between then, and the Saudi Crown Prince has basically said, I can't do this domestically, all politics are domestic, until there is a solution in Gaza. That also doesn't seem likely at the moment. Where do you think the Prime Minister stands on this deal?
Right. I think that the Prime Minister probably wasn't very happy about the announcement or about the report about the about the U.S. Saudi deal. If it depends on solving the Palestinian issue, then who knows if it will actually happen. If it's just a matter of joining the Abraham Accords, I don't know. Maybe he would go along with that.
Oh, Lisa, I think we lost your connection there. Courtney, let's kick it back to you.
On the same point, yeah, also genuinely curious here, sort of how the White House has been thinking through this process here. Obviously, there's been a lot of congressional pushback on what the president's proposed here as well, including that civilian nuclear program plan for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty curious. I think a lot of people were confused as to why this wasn't mentioned originally before the ink was dry, as you said, on that signing. I do wonder, whether this is something that they'll actually get done. But I will say the Abraham Accords are, of course, a legacy piece for this president. This is something he considers one of his great successes of his first term. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, obviously was the architect of that, continues to maintain a close advisory relationship to the president. So I'm quite sure Jared was involved in these discussions. But this is something that the president would like to see, expanded as part of his legacy. So, I think they're putting a lot of support and pressure behind this effort.
The Secretary of State Marco Rubio was on the road this week. He was at the ASEAN conference for a few days, and he talked about the prospects of there being some kind of diplomatic resolution yet. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about that.
I saw Arachi, their foreign minister, who the other day say or something about their policies, an eye for an eye. The president's policy is a head for an eye. I mean, honestly, that's what it's going to be. I mean, they will pay a very heavy price.
Courtney, on this note, I want to turn to you because it's been emphasized that the president continues to talk about talks being underway, Iran's eagerness to engage in some negotiation that would lead to a potential deal. I'm also struck listening to the Secretary of State there about the comments that the president made in the Oval Office at the end of last week when he said that there were any number of administration officials who were involved in these negotiations. And I wonder what your reporting is telling us just about who, in fact, is driving them. Is it Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner? Is it Secretary Rubio, who, again, has been on the road quite far afield from the Middle East? Is it Vice President Vance? Your sense of sort of where the administration is kind of putting its chips right now as it looks to have some kind of diplomatic solution, perhaps eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the people you mentioned certainly play a key role. Of course, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are the ones, really driving some of these conversations. But Secretary Rubio is involved. This meeting on Friday, the president reportedly had involved senior members of his cabinet, which of course includes Secretary Rubio. He mentioned Secretary Wright, Secretary Bessent. These are the people that he's really leaned on throughout this conflict to help inform him on some of the decisions around these diplomatic talks, around sanctions, and how to exert pressure on Iran to bring them to the negotiating table. So we will see. The president is hosting a cabinet meeting next week at Camp David, and I'm sure Iran will be one of the main topics of that meeting as well.
All right, Courtney Subramanian, our White House correspondent, and Alyssa Odenheimer joining us from overseas. Thank you both so much.
Extremely busy week shaping up there. That cabinet meeting that Courtney mentioned just a moment ago, and then this funeral, I think, as I said, going to draw a lot of world leaders to Washington. It's
kind of going to be a de facto summit because Lindsey Graham was so influential when it came to foreign policy. And frankly, it's also a good excuse to come to town and get in front of the president. Yes. And we know how influential that can be in his foreign policy. All right. It's being called an unprecedented cyber incident. OpenAI's autonomous hacking of another tech company. What will the CEO, Sam Altman, say about that? That's more after the break.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week. And I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Well, after 8 months abroad, the International Space Station for its first mission, NASA astronaut Chris Williams has returned to Earth. Now, during his assignment, Williams contributed to research for new cancer treatments, advanced the production of materials to improve computers and electronics, and even completed 2 spacewalks. Williams was joined by 2 astronauts from Russia. The Soyuz spacecraft had landed in Kazakhstan about an hour ago. There he goes. Well, Brazilian Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, son of former President Jair Bolsonaro, he was confirmed as the presidential candidate of his father's Liberal Party. Now, it took place at a national convention in Sao Paulo and is a bid against incumbent President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. It comes after a chaotic week marked by fresh legal trouble and an uneasy truce with his stepmother. In company news, investor excitement over the memory chip trade has a bar set high for the Shanghai debut of CXMT. Now, the company is set to become the biggest China-listed firm on its very first day of trading after raising $9.8 billion. CXMT, it's the world's 4th largest maker of chips that underpin everything from smartphones to AI servers. And while a heat dome expands across the U.S., Chile's Central Andes, well, they received some much-needed snow. One of the Santiago metropolitan area's most popular mountain destinations, well, it's been suffering from weeks of limited snowfall, but a recent storm which flooding, landslides to some areas, it left more than 6 feet of snow in the Andes. Yesterday, the popular destination recorded full capacity attendance. Seeing the snow while we're in the heat.
Feels very far from here.
It does, yes.
I never
Very
wanted to
nice.
see snow ever again after the winter we had in New York,
It's a
but
long
that
winter.
does look quite fun, I will say. All right.
Thank you,
thanks,
Lisa.
This week, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman plans to brief the Trump administration and lawmakers on the upcoming generation of artificial intelligence models. This coming after a breach at the technology firm Hugging Face demonstrated that containment measures for AI models are sometimes not enough, with the company saying it was hacked by an autonomous outside agent.
Also this week, 4 of the Mag 7 are set to report earnings as discussions continue on whether surging AI investments will generate sufficient returns against a still unsettled geopolitical backdrop. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg Tech and Industrial Policy reporter Maggie Eastland. Jess Menton, our Bloomberg Senior Equities reporter, is here with us in New York. Maggie, let me turn to you first, and I look at this statement from OpenAI on that incident, a new kind of security incident, unprecedented cyber incident. Talk a bit about what happened here. Explain it to me as best you can. And how unforeseen was this, and how worried should we be about it?
And why has no one watched the historical documentary The Terminator?
Okay,
but that's
fair
fine.
enough.
All right.
Yes,
It's a very
that's the
Skynet moment.
The follow-up
but
question.
Please continue.
Yeah, this does seem a little Skynet, but it's not quite there yet, thankfully. So what happened was OpenAI disclosed that 2 of its models, both the Soul model, which is the most recent one, and actually a model that hasn't been released at all yet, that's still in development, kind of like got out of the box, so to speak. So they were testing their new model kind of in an air-gapped environment. And they asked the model to do something, to complete a security test. So instead of completing that test in the way they had envisioned, this AI model went a little rogue, and it actually kind of like hacked into the internet, which it wasn't supposed to have access to. And then it went to Hugging Face, which is a platform that a lot of software developers and AI researchers use regularly. So it was trying to pull some things from Hugging Face in order to do the tests that OpenAI had asked it to do. So this is clearly an out-of-the-box situation, though it was responding to a directive, but clearly the AI models are starting to act in ways that are a bit unpredictable, and according to directions they haven't exactly been given.
I don't like
sleep
this.
on that innocent-looking emoji logo for Hugging Face.
Here's the other question is some people are saying, yes, they have an obligation to disclose this, but it's a little bit of a show-off as well. It functions a bit as an ad for their AI to say, look, we've built this thing. It's so powerful. Look what we can do. Is there a bit of braggadocio here, or is it mostly just they need to disclose it to tell people what's going on?
Yeah, I think that, the part that maybe is not doesn't get as much attention is that, OpenAI did ask the model to complete the security test, and it was trying to do that when it hacked into Hugging Face. It was just doing it in a way that wasn't really what the company had intended. So I think it's sort of a mixed picture here, right? You could see, models acting and trying to act on the directions they've been given, but just doing it in a way that's not what the user intended. So it's a bit nuanced here, and that's more the concern, at least at this point, rather than a full-blown kind of Skynet situation.
All right, fine.
All right, Jess Menton, all of this happening in the crucible of tech earnings season. So we heard from Alphabet. That company talked about its spend on AI infrastructure. I think if you look at those 4 major hyperscalers, it's something like $725 billion is what they're forecasted to be spending on this. How did our sense of the level of investment change as a result of what Alphabet reported, and what are we going to learn this week from these other companies?
Well, the playbook has changed for these companies and specifically their stocks. Normally, your stock would be rewarded as a hyperscaler if you're spending more money on capital expenditures related to AI. But then what changed here? Well, a lot of that has to do with the macro. I mean, y'all talk so much about oil prices spiking. Just saw that this past week briefly above $100 for Brent prices. And then also, what does that mean for inflation and the path of rates? Because if these companies want to issue more stock issuance, but then if their stock is falling, that's a problem. So if you have to tap the debt markets, that's even more expensive than what their earnings outlook would have been at the start of this year. So then something has to reprice. But with that said, if you look at overall S&P 500 earning growth for the first half of the year, it's expected to track around 28% based on Bloomberg intelligence data. So for perspective, outside of the bounce backs from COVID or the great financial crisis, that would be the best growth since 2004. So normally you wouldn't see that at this point in the economic cycle. So it's not to say that it's doom and gloom, because earnings growth is one of the key pillars for corporate earnings and obviously how that ties to GDP growth. But now we're supposed to get an update for the first time on second quarter GDP growth at the end of this next week after the Fed meeting. Obviously that's more backward looking, but the Atlanta Fed GDP Now models a little bit below 2%. So what does that mean for corporate earnings in general if these are the stocks that have really powered that growth over the past few years?
I was also reading that, the tech sell-offs look pretty scary, but in the end, it might be a better thing to stabilize parts of the sector. Can you explain to us why that might be true?
Well, the big thing the past few years, and something that's switched recently, is typically if you talk to whatever moniker you want to use for these big tech giants, typically because of the concentration and record concentration they have in the S&P 500 as well as the NASDAQ, you would see it just completely bring down a lot of the indexes. But what's interesting, whether it's this past week or in recent weeks, you've seen a divergence between the Mag 7 stocks and see what's happening in chip makers, specifically memory. So of course, Apple's going to be reporting next week after the bell on Thursday. That's a different type of AI spender. It doesn't spend as much money related to AI in the same ways as the other companies. And it's also the best performing stock out of the Mag 7 this year. It's up over 20%. Tesla's the worst, down close to 30%.
I feel like it wasn't the shiny new kid for a while, and now people are going back to it.
But then also it had those issues with price hikes for those devices we have. Mark Gurman of Bloomberg reported about that a month ago. Its stock briefly got hit, but it's not spending the same amount on AI and related to CapEx as these other companies, but it's more unique when it comes to the memory components that's more expensive for it. So you see the counterparts in the chip space, whether it's a Micron, SanDisk, those were the two best performers in the S&P 500 the first half of this year. But noted, since the stocks peaked last month, those have been hit by double digits and pretty hard. So even though you're seeing the hyperscalers pull back, you're still seeing the overall market, whether it's the S&P 500, still about 2% above its all-time high. So you're seeing a divergence there in the concentration in the market.
Maggie Eastland, we had our moonshot moment in recent days, and that was presaged, of course, by what happened with Deekseek a while back. Bloomberg reporting now that Deekseek is pausing this second fundraising round after some comments purportedly made by its chief executive. Explain what's going on here and what this says about the dynamic between the innovation and work that's happening in China vis-a-vis what's happening here in the United States when it comes to AI.
Yeah, so as you said, we're reporting that Deekseek is delaying their plans for initial public offering a bit. I think bigger picture here, what we're seeing is even though this is delayed, we also saw with the release of Kimi K3, another Chinese model just a few weeks ago, and they're also looking to IPO potentially in the next year, is the Chinese companies are moving kind of at a pace that's similar to the US companies. Obviously, OpenAI and Anthropic also have IPOs upcoming. But actually, these Chinese competitors are proving to be a real risk for them just because the AI that they offer is very good and it's also very cheap. So that's been a huge point of debate and kind of sending shockwaves through Washington over the last 2 weeks is just, how good the Chinese competition is and sort of the question of whether those models were created in a way that was fair. Policymakers here are weighing.
Yeah, speaking of policymakers, I'm also wondering as we see some of these jailbreaks from these systems and people start to talk a little bit more seriously about some AI regulation, what that means for the development as you get more competitive with the Chinese sectors and if these AI companies are concerned about regulations that could, hem where they want to go with this technology.
Yeah, some technologists have said point blank that this new regulatory framework that the U.S. companies have to follow might be hampering their development and putting the U.S. at disadvantage in the race with China. On the other hand, you have safety advocates who have been saying that we need to be having these tests for a long time. And when you have, AI models kind of like hacking other websites, maybe they have a point. So right now there is some testing that is essentially required. It's nominally voluntary, but we've seen, companies that don't comply be export controlled. So, Sam's going to be here this week in Washington, and he's talking about the next generation of models. No doubt he'll be getting questions about the Hugging Face hack, but also from his perspective, it's going to be important to make the case for, releasing that next wave of models because OpenAI will try to get Washington's blessing for that.
We'll see what the conversation is like around that kind of FINRA-esque regulatory model that's being proposed here. Just maybe wrapping up with you, we were talking there about the prospect of IPOs, yes, in China, but there are the prospect of them happening here in the U.S. as well. How does this environment that we're in right now, maybe a little more heightened skepticism about this investment, color the plans that these major companies have for IPOs in this space?
We've already seen some recent ones this past, actually in June, we obviously had the SpaceX IPO, and then there's been smaller ones where you're starting to see those stocks price below, actually after they were already trading below where they initially were supposed to price in that midpoint range. So that's something that's another issue when you think about the growth of the economy, but also Oracle will be reporting next week. And a big thing is the credit default swaps on a 5-year basis. That's trading around multi-year highs. And that, according to Barclays, is more, what does that mean for the AI type of sovereign debt fears. So obviously not housed in the Mag 7, but another important key because that's also becoming more expensive for whether it's Amazon as well as Meta. And then Meta's actually has that $12 billion data center in Texas that needs to be financed soon. So that's going to be another issue when you're thinking about the financing with that. So that's going to be all key of how all that ties together when you're looking at the credit side of things as well.
I mean, I am starting to hear a bit more people say the quiet part out loud, and that's the word bubble. I mean, what's your take on that? Or is this, as Mark Twain said, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The reports of a bubble have been greatly exaggerated.
I feel like because of the earnings that have backed up growth, whether you're talking about from a profit perspective, it's very different than the dot-com bubble fears because Pets.com is always the famous example people want to point to. I mean, these companies have the earnings to back it up. So it's a little bit different than a bubble, but bubbles can go on for years too. But a lot of my sources tend to push back on things like that.
Surface tension continues to build.
Very good. Surface tension. I like that. See, smarty pants. All right. Jess Menton, she covers equities for us. She's our senior equities reporter. And Maggie Eastland, she's our tech reporter. Thank you both so much for joining us.
All right, coming up here, midterm elections are entering the final 100 days. It's hard to believe that, but we are 100 days away from the midterm.
I don't want to talk about it.
Elections, putting that
but we're gonna.
perspective. We are. Democrats have their eye on the state of Maine with hopes of flipping a key Senate seat there. Susan Collins looking somewhat vulnerable. A report from the Pine Tree State. As Bloomberg this weekend continues, the Democrats in that state, after a lot of travails, now have a nominee who will be going up against Senator Collins here in that election. We'll see if he can raise the amount of money that Senator Collins has raised. All that coming up here soon on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app. Stay with us.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Two of the greatest outfielders of their generation and the best power-hitting second baseman in MLB history will have their day in Cooperstown today. Carlos Beltran, Andrew Jones, and Jeff Kent, they'll be officially inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame this afternoon. Well, to golf now, where the 3M Open enters its final day of play in Minnesota. Topping the leaderboard is 21-year-old Jackson Koivin at 20 under par, and he's followed by a two-way tie in second place between Ben Coles and Emilio Grillo at 17 under par. Well, pop singer Katy Perry speaking out against the Trump administration for using her song Firework in a social media post without her approval. The video posted on the White House TikTok account shows footage of military attacks with the caption, "Iran has been warned." Well, in a post on X, Perry wrote that using her song to soundtrack destruction and violence is a complete violation of everything her song stands for. Well, it's the final day for Comic-Con in San Diego. The 4-day event is the nation's largest comic and pop culture convention that includes celebrity panels, studio reveals across comics, movies, television, and also gaming. Now, each year it draws hundreds of thousands of fans dressed as their favorite characters.
Honestly, my main motivation is just seeing the smile on people's faces when they see someone it's like that joy when you're a kid and you see a character that you like and seeing someone play as it just brings joy. And I like doing that for people.
Well, the big news out of Comic-Con, though, Ryan Gosling was announced as a star of Marvel's new Ghost Rider film. Ryan Gosling getting in on the action.
I don't know what that is. I'll have to Google it.
Ghost Rider.
I've never been to this. Have you?
In New York. I've covered it many a time.
Oh, yeah. I covered the Baltimore. I used to cover the Baltimore one.
East Coast rival.
I, however, never did it in costume. I wonder if Lisa Mateo can say the same thing. Lisa?
There may or may not be a Wonder Woman picture out there somewhere in the interwebs.
We will scour the archives.
The internet. Do your thing, audience. The internet never dies.
Excellent.
Thanks, Lisa.
Lisa, thank you.
All right. As we begrudgingly spoke about earlier, we are just 100 days until the November midterm election, with Democrats hoping to regain control of one or possibly both chambers of Congress.
One of the most closely watched races is in Maine, where Democrats selected Troy Jackson as their nominee for U.S. Senate after the scandal involving Graham Plattner. Jackson will face Susan Collins in the fall, who is running for an historic 6th term in the U.S. Senate. Joining us now is my friend, former colleague Alex Seitz-Wald. He's now deputy editor for Maine's Midcoast Villager newspaper.
Look at that Maine-esque backdrop.
To Maine, and I confess, I always pick up the paper when I'm in Maine at the Hannafords or Shermans, wherever I find it available. Alex, great to see you. And before we start talking about what happened yesterday, where things go from here, let me play a bit of sound from Troy Jackson at that convention yesterday, talking about his path forward.
There is a place in this campaign for all of you. There is work for you in this movement. And I will spend every day now through November earning, not trust. because today we turn the page. Today, this becomes a general election campaign, and today we begin the work of defeating Susan Collins in November.
Alex, let's just start with what the vibes were like in that center yesterday. You had the Democrats there. There was a lot of anxiety kind of going into this in the last couple of weeks about how much discord or debate or dissent there might be among Maine Democrats. It seems like that wasn't manifest at that event yesterday.
Yeah, David, and thanks for having me. This was a fairly anticlimactic ending to a very tumultuous Democratic Senate primary that was originally supposed to end with Governor Janet Mills winning. She was the pick of Chuck Schumer and the Washington establishment. Then Graham Plattner, this unknown oyster farmer, came out of nowhere, totally dominated, won the primary with 72% of the vote just last month. June 9th was that primary date. But then, of course, allegations, really the last of many scandals, forced him to withdraw on July 10th, putting the Democratic Party in a really sort of unprecedented situation of having to pick a new nominee before a legal deadline. They had just a little over 2 weeks to do it. And it looked like it could be heading for this messy convention where, delegates would battle, but it ended up that Troy Jackson just kind of out-organized all the other candidates, dominated the delegate selection process, and essentially ended up with a coronation yesterday. The vibes were good. People were excited and, ready to move on and focus on Susan Collins after the entire primary, but these were the diehards in the room there. Those were your highest information, dedicated Democrats. Troy Jackson is still introducing himself to the rest of the party and the rest of the state. He just ran for governor in last month's primary, came in third. So that's what his remarks that you played are about, him still doing the work to, introduce himself, get Democrats to know him, and then rally around him to defeat Susan Collins, because it is going to be a huge battle. The Republicans already have a big advantage in fundraising. He's got to catch up to that, catch up to the organizing, the hiring, and all the infrastructure that goes into winning what's going to be one of the biggest Senate contests in the country.
They're playing Noah Kahn, I understand. Northern Attitude.
I do love Noah Kahn, I'm not going to lie. It's very interesting to me because you think the Democrats would have learned this lesson with what happened in the presidential race, clinging too long to a candidate that had some clear issues. I mean, this Graham Plattner was snake bit from the beginning. And a very controversial candidate. Now they're scrambling in a race that it seems like Democrats could have won. But when you look at the polling, Jackson is up slightly, 49% to 46%. It seems to me like that's within the margin of error, especially with 3% still undecided. How much do you think the Plattner scandals, plural, are going to weigh down this candidate and continue to weigh down Democrats in the race, even if it's just when it comes to turnout?
Yeah, I mean, Republicans are certainly counting on the Plattner scandals to weigh down Jackson, who, like I said, is not the best well-known. There's 15% in that poll still don't have enough of an opinion about Jackson. So the RNC yesterday put out an AI video of Graham Plattner's face morphing into Troy Jackson. Another Republican group put out a TV ad in which it connects Jackson directly to Plattner. And that's a fair attack. They were very closely aligned. I actually went to an event where Graham Plattner was catering a Troy Jackson event. This was before Plattner was a known quantity at all. They had similar policies. They were both endorsed by Bernie Sanders in their primary. They campaigned together. That said, they're very different personalities. Troy Jackson is an actual blue-collar guy, not like Plattner claimed to be. He's from the interior of Maine, not the coast, about 250 miles from the coast, this tiny town of Allagash that had, I think, 237 people in the last census. Most prominent thing there is a chainsaw museum. He's a fifth-generation logger, so a very different personality, also with more insider experience. But this is going to be something that Jackson's going to have to deal with. Plattner, as he was withdrawing from the race, kind of wanted to tee things up for Jackson, and it took Jackson saying, "I don't want anything to do with Graham Plattner," for that to kind of go away. But those connections are going to remain very prevalent for a candidate who is not super well known yet to a lot of Maine voters.
Alex, last question here is about the introduction he has to make to donors outside of the state of Maine. And I think you know this extremely well. A peculiarity of this race is how important it is on a national level. So yes, Mainers are getting to know this candidate. They know Susan Collins, of course. But we saw Graham Plattner raise a ton of money from outside the state of Maine. you look at the war chest that Susan Collins and affiliated or groups that back her have amassed, it's sizable. How is he going to do that? What do we know about the way in which he's going to be going hat in hand to people outside of the state of Maine to get money to back his candidacy? Troy Jackson.
Yeah, Troy Jackson is not somebody who has a long history of, hobnobbing with the wealthy and bringing in lots of money at all. Plattner was able to do a lot of fundraising with those small dollar donors, but he's got a lot of ground to make up. There's something like $113 million already reserved from Republicans. That said, the best thing going for Jackson, and really all he needs to say to Democratic donors, is Susan Collins, control of the Senate. She is the most vulnerable Republican running for re-election this year. Maine is a blue state. It, should, I'm doing air quotes here, vote Democratic. It should have a Democratic senator in office. That's the case he'll make, and that he's going to say all we need to do is get our message out and bring those Democrats home. Susan Collins has had this ability, she's proven time and again, to win crossover voters. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state with 9 percentage points, and then she ended up winning with 9 percentage points on her own. Same ballot, a bunch of voters cross party lines. So he just needs to get enough money to get the message to those Democratic voters about the stakes for Trump, for the Supreme Court, for everything that comes with control of the Senate.
Alex Seitz-Wald, great to see you. Of the Midcoast Villager, Christina, there's a cafe behind the Villagers' offices in Camden. You can go there and have a coffee and talk to folks like
Alex,
Alex.
if you're hiring, you let me know. I love this job, but this is all looking quite lovely. Congratulations on the gig, and let us know.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
All right, when we come back, it is time for BT Dubs, how the younger generation is making the most of their future retirement. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BT Dubs. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura, and Lisa Mateo is here to run you through some of the stories you might have missed this week. Lisa, what you got for us?
All right, so what age did you guys start putting into retirement?
That was not where I thought that question was going. My goodness.
Let's keep it light here.
Okay, happy Sunday. I'm going to drink my coffee. David, you want to take this one?
No, I've always
Was it like
been
30s,
told
20s?
20s?
Okay,
yeah.
20s.
When I got my first full-time job at my old network, one of the old guys said, you will max out that 401k contribution, and he was right. And so I've done it since my 20s. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is the topic of our latest Bloomberg article. It's called Gen Z's Retirement Maxers.
Two
yes.
X's.
2 X's. Yes.
God.
Choosing savings over doom spending. So a lot more Gen Zers, they're putting away half their income, and they're living cheaply.
Putting away half their income?
Half their income, I'm telling
My
you.
word.
And you know what
They
age
are
they're
not paying New
starting?
York rents,
As they
I
live
will
at home
say.
and sleep
They're
on the
starting at
couch.
19.
Wow.
This is what age
Is it
people
because so
starting
many
to
of them are
retire
living
to.
at home?
It's because a lot of things. They think Social Security is going to run out. They think that AI is going to take over a lot of their jobs, so they want to be financially secure. So maybe they don't have to take a job they don't want and stick with it just because they need the money. So they want to have the money started and banked away now. So it's something that they're doing. So
and their
retirement
level of
maxing.
determinism, maxing.
Maxing.
It is. It is.
I'm getting tired of that word, but I'll allow it here.
Wow, this must be a change. This hasn't been happening for a long time.
It's part of a movement, okay? It's
Okay.
called FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence Retire Early.
There's always an
okay?
acronym.
Yes,
Okay.
there's always an acronym for
I
it.
know of some adherence to this.
Wait, really?
Oh, really?
Well, but it's not even, I think it's like they really want to retire extremely early,
Yes.
like in their 40s. Early 40s?
That's early.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
wow. What are you gonna
travel
do with
and do whatever.
yourself?
I mean, the world's your oyster if you've saved like 80% or something like that.
It's tough. It's
Yeah.
tough. But the only thing they're doing wrong, which experts are saying, is that they're focusing so much on the saving, is that they're not paying their debt, their credit cards.
Oh.
They're also not focusing enough on the living. They're focusing on the saving, but not on the living.
That's the other thing is like you're only young once. Like I do think you shouldn't spend recklessly, but there are some times where you should just buy that ticket and go. Like life is short and it is hard to plan, especially in the world we are in today. So you just never know.
All right.
Balance is okay.
All right. As a kid, did you get allowance?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Was we always fighting with mom and dad for this allowance?
Well,
okay, because
No, it was a set amount. I got it or didn't get it. Yeah.
You get what you get, and you don't get
if
upset.
I were young now, I'd be putting it in my 401k.
See, exactly. This one is from New York Magazine. Okay, this is for New York. When it's barely enough money for boba, New York City parents and teens tussle over how much allowance is enough.
Let me tell you
okay,
what,
so
it's definitely not enough for boba in New York City.
It's not enough for boba,
No.
and kids are having to, struggle. They're struggling. They can't get their boba because they're getting $5 a week in allowance.
For radio audience, we're seeing video here of Mimi's, which you'd brought up in a previous segment,
Yes,
like
expensive.
the $30 frozen
Very
yogurt.
expensive frozen yogurt. But they're getting $5 $100 a week. Some kids are, though, getting like $200 a week.
Word.
So it's putting a lot of stress on the kids. Experts are saying.
Stress on the kids.
Yep.
Getting $200 a week.
Well, think about it. You know, you're going out and you're going for your boba, and then you have a kid next to you who gets $200 a week, and you're sitting there with your measly $5. So it's putting a little bit of pressure on the kids. Not to mention the parents.
Life. I mean,
the parents who have to fork over the money. Just saying, it's a big fight in our household.
We could spend the whole segment talking about boba.
I think my daughter gets about $15 a week, but she's 18
boba a week.
No, $15.
I thought she was getting. I was like.
Week. Big tapioca fiend.
And I'm being called cheap
car
because
payment.
of it.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
All right.
I do like boba, but I don't like paying for it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Okay. Company retreats, right? If some companies do that, you go on the picnic, you go on whatever. Would you like a BTW?
Do we do one here? Should we
Sure,
do one?
okay.
We need to do one because it's a hot new thing. Okay, this one is in the Wall Street Journal. Don't kill corporate retreats. Make them more like a kid's birthday party. So instead of doing these things,
Which is generally my nightmare, but okay.
You don't like the gnat sap race or the egg things? Or all those. Yes,
the
it's so
orange
fun.
beneath your neck,
like
and you have to
3 days in
transfer it to
Cape
someone
Cod.
else.
Okay, you're roasting marshmallows. You're potato sack racing. You're building human pyramids. Okay, you're doing all the fun
Trust
things
falls.
like kids do. And trust falls, exactly.
Yes.
Doing
Should we do
things
one right
like
now?
kids do.
How do you think that will end for you, David Gura?
Not well. Not well.
So they're saying forget the lunches, forget the dinners with the cocktails. People get out of hand and people don't know how to behave.
It's true.
Do something like this and then, you can have a good time and you can bond with your coworkers. I say we
adult,
do it.
Adult summer camp. I mean, we
Adult
talked
summer
about adult
camp.
summer camp. Like,
Yeah.
I'm happy to go do some
Potato sack races.
potato sack races.
Potato sack racing, golf and ski trips, or sometimes they try to do those, but they're not good because some people are not good at golf. I would not be good at that
I'm
at
not
all.
good at skiing, but
Or
I'm really good
skiing.
at after skiing. I'm really good at like the
The
chalet.
après
With,
ski.
I'm
There you
pro
go.
at
Big
opera.
into that.
Yep,
Okay.
real good at it.
All right, big movie weekend. Okay, so movie theaters, this is from the New York Times. They're embracing the lucrative business of buckets. We're talking about the popcorn buckets,
Oh,
okay?
yep.
And they're these big things. Sometimes they're designed for major movies. They can sell as much as $70, okay?
I'm sorry.
There's a couple behind. You have the replica of IMAX, of director's IMAX camera for $50.
Oh, so these are like
okay?
not just your cardboard
No,
tubs.
these are like
They're keepers.
high tech. This is a 22-inch rendering of the Trojan horse for $70.
My word.
Filled to the brim with popcorn.
Epic.
And they're collected. People collect them, so it's
How
a
do you collect
thing.
them? They're so
It's-
greasy
they're
afterward,
very
aren't they? You've got that kind of
large.
fake butter
Do you not
residue.
own like some soap and a sponge?
What do you do with it after?
Not dishwasher
I don't
safe, I
know. But there's a few companies, actually 3, that make these different buckets. So it's a little bit of competition there, but they're making good money. I'm telling you, I would not fork over
That's
the
a lot of
$70.
popcorn. But I guess maybe the popcorn's not the point.
When was the last time you guys went to a movie theater?
Oh,
Recently?
a few months ago.
I'm going this week.
Are you
to
going
see
to
Odyssey?
are you
Finally,
The Odyssey.
I'm not getting the
Are you gonna buy a
popcorn
Trojan
bucket.
horse?
I'm not
No.
buying the Trojan horse. I'm not doing it.
Put it on the company card. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see how
If
that looks.
someone were to sneak into your house using a Trojan horse style object, what would trick you?
I guess that
what would you
popcorn
bring
bucket.
in?
Maybe the giant popcorn bucket.
Lisa, I feel like it'd be some sort of like expensive workout equipment.
Oh, yeah.
David,
the
maybe
treadmill. Somebody's in the treadmill. Hiding away.
just a really large, giant handmade tie.
We're gonna
You
leave you
bring
with
that right in your house.
Leave you with that amazing image, all those amazing images. Lisa, thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Lisa.
BTW. By the way, Bloomberg This Weekend, giving us that update, the stories you may have missed over the course of the week, available on the Bloomberg Terminal or at Bloomberg.com.
All right, we're coming up on our 8 a.m. hour. Stick with us. Bloomberg This Weekend. We'll be right back. We've got a lot more news ahead.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. from New York. We are here in Bloomberg's world headquarters. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura, alongside Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reporting and analysis live this morning and every Saturday and Sunday from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wall Street time. We are nearing the start of executive time for the President of the United States. He will be a participant in that. That's all that's on his schedule today.
We have seen some retweeting already this morning, though, so it does seem the president is awake. We'll keep an eye on those Truth Socials to see if we get any news on any of these topics. There's a lot of things he could be addressing this morning. We're going to address them shortly with our White House reporter.
Yeah, including the quiet that we've seen, the lack of strikes from the U.S. on Iran here over the last 2 nights. Let's get an update on the headlines here first from Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
You got it. Officials in Berlin, they continue to search for a suspect who they say drove a van into a crowd during the German capital's LGBTQ parade. 1 person was killed, at least 16 injured. Police say the suspect has ties to Islamic groups. Hundreds of thousands of people had come to take part in Christopher Street Day. It's one of Europe's largest LGBTQ plus celebrations. Also in Europe, French firefighters, military crews, they continue to battle fast-moving wildfires in southwest France. Shifting winds drive it into new areas. French military personnel, well, they're supporting relief operations alongside healthcare workers, assisting evacuees. More than 300,000 people have been displaced in parts of France and Spain this week. And those fast-moving fires, well, they've had an impact on the final day of the Tour de France. Today's stage 21 will now be shorter, about 55 miles down from just over 82. It's due to a lack of security officials who have been deployed to fight the blazes. Now, the 113th edition of the race, it lasted 3 weeks. It started on July 4th in Barcelona, Spain. Well, from wildfires to a typhoon, Typhoon Newell made landfall today in southern China, bringing strong winds, heavy rain to the region. More than 70,000 people have been relocated, and over 300 emergency shelters, well, they're set up. Classes, work, production, transportation, and other businesses, they've all been suspended. Well, back here at home, Maine Democrats officially picked Troy Jackson as their new U.S. Senate nominee. After previous pick, Graham Plattner dropped out. Jackson spoke to the crowd at a special convention in Bangor.
Today, we turn the page. Today, this becomes a general election campaign, and today we begin the work of defeating Susan Collins in November.
Collins has held her seat, even though a GOP presidential candidate hasn't won Maine in nearly 40 years. Jackson, he's a fifth-generation logger and former Maine Senate president. Jackson is already benefiting from voter frustration. In a University of New Hampshire poll this week, it found Jackson with 49% of the vote to Collins's 46%. Well, to the war in Iran, where the U.S. has paused its almost 2-week run of strikes against Iran for a second night. And that's raising further questions over President Donald Trump's war strategy. The New York Times reporting that President Trump and his advisors, they're concerned that the war, it could draw that already, those diminished stores of Patriot anti-missiles interceptors and also those air defense weapons in the region. But tensions, they're still high near a global energy choke point in the southern Red Sea. That's due to fighting between Yemen's Houthi militants and also Saudi Arabia. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that update.
Thanks, Lisa. We're going to dig into that right now because it's not just diminishing stockpiles, but as we talked about earlier, it's diminishing patience with U.S. allies. The New York Times writing that this holdback on behalf of the administration is also due to a fear that it could potentially lead to a widening war in the Middle East, alienating allies and causing a crunch on the economy. Back with us now is Bloomberg White House correspondent Courtney Subrani. Courtney, have you heard yet? We know the president is showing some signs of being up and re-truth socialing. There's a phrase for you.
It's a cumbersome phrase, but I hear it.
I really miss calling it Twitter. Have we heard anything from the White House on this report? I know it's early, or even what you think the reaction will be to the fact that people are reporting this is due not only to this shortage and the stockpile of munitions, but the fact that they are acknowledging that they are starting to antagonize Gulf allies with the continuation of this conflict and the lack of results, it seems. Sure. At some point, they've eliminated most of these targets. What else are they going to hit? And are putting their military readiness at risk?
Yeah, I mean, the White House has been largely silent on this report. They put out a statement from White House Communications Director Stephen Chung, basically along the lines that they have always said that he maintains all options on the table. He always prefers a diplomatic solution. But I think the reporting that there is real concern around the anti-missile interceptors and the other defense weapons being depleted is one that the Pentagon has been raising since the beginning of the war. And of course, as they continued 13 days of strikes, of course, that exacerbates the situation. But yeah, I think the question around what the U.S. strategy is here is an important one, especially for allies in the Middle East and around the world, in Europe, because there doesn't really seem to be some sort of cohesive strategy. I did speak to someone close to the White House on Friday about this situation. And this person, noted that the president can stop and start the war as he sees fit, that he, has more flexibility than people think, because, he can return to the negotiating table and then ramp up escalations as needed. But yeah, I think patience is wearing thin, both with the world leaders, but also here in the U.S. The war remains hugely unpopular, and as we get closer to November's midterm elections, that's going to be a major pain point for the Republican Party.
Gordie, I don't know if you went to the White House Correspondents Association dinner round 2.
She did. She looked excellent.
The dress
was very good. Yeah.
President Trump talked about sort of the broader military plans he's considering during the course of his speech at that event. Let's take a listen to what he had to say just about what he's kind of marshaled to the region.
So we've hit Iran very hard. Their Navy is gone. Their Air Force is gone. 250 jets, no longer. 159 boats, good boats. In fact, I said, why the hell didn't we keep them? We could have used them. But 159, but all at the bottom of the sea. They are talking to us right now. They'd love to make a deal. I don't think they're ready to. I don't think it's time yet, but I'm willing to listen.
A couple of things I'll highlight there. His emphasis on the fact that talks are continuing. The other, that he's destroyed Iran's Navy. I guess what I'm curious about is kind of the other side to this, which is the blockade is in place. The U.S. continues to have so much military might in the Middle East. And I'm curious sort of what the latest thinking is about how long the U.S. can sustain that. I think a lot of folks, once the MOU was effectively torn up and that ceasefire ended, said maybe just having the blockade in place would be some kind of a forcing mechanism. But how long, realistically, can the U.S. keep that mechanism in place?
I don't think that is entirely clear. I think, there are, of course, questions about how long they can fund this war, how long they can keep up, with the stockpiles and, deploying resources to the region, which is why, I think we are seeing this president sort of take his foot off the gas, so to speak, to see if there is a way to go, come back to the negotiating table. But yeah, I mean, these are questions that the administration is just going to continue to face as we try and piece together some sort of cohesive strategy. As you heard, the president likes to talk about how Iran has been degraded, yet here we are. He was overseeing the dignified transfer of 4 service members last week, and the fighting continues. And now we have a new front opening in the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. So, these are questions that are still unanswered, at least from, a public standpoint in terms of messaging and how the administration is explaining this.
To that end, before we let you go, there is another report out in the Times talking about what we were kind of alluding to earlier, that war escalation may actually have the opposite desired effect in Iran. I think partially because there really hasn't been a true regime change there. And this is a population that can endure and has endured a lot of both economic and physical pain over the decades. It says few, if any, of Mr. Trump's inner circle believe the plan to escalate was wise, said 2 people briefed. One senior U.S. official expressed doubts that resuming major combat operations would drive Iran back to the bargaining table. It could have the opposite effect, kind of keeping support, rallying around the flag and solidifying that extremist base. Is that a concern that you think is being conveyed to the president? And I'm wondering if the visit of Netanyahu might have the opposite approach. He's been very critical of the president ending this war kind of in the middle and not fully removing the leadership in Iran. I'm wondering what you think that upcoming visit will do for the president's decision to either continue or back off from these conflicts.
Well, it's hard to predict, where Donald Trump lands on
fair enough
decision making.
That's fair.
Excuse me, but I will say, Netanyahu does have a huge impact on how he views the war or the state of the war, and has throughout this entire conflict. So I would suspect that after he meets with Netanyahu this week, we'll hear from the president whether that changes his strategy on executing the course of this war. I don't know that, but I will say that Netanyahu has had impact on that. And I think that's why I think he is traveling here. I mean, he's, of course, coming for Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral. But, also he understands how important it is to get in front of President Trump and have a conversation with him face to face, because he has seemingly had some impact on his decision making.
Gordie, let's put this conversation about the war and the future of the war in kind of a domestic political crucible, if we could. So we're having this conversation just days after the administration imposed these new tariffs under Section 301 of that 1974 Trade Act. And we know about the how inherently inflationary a lot of these tariffs have been and will continue to be. There's a difficult dance, a difficult calculus the White House is going to have to go through here as this war carries on. And as we see that inflation higher than the Fed wants it to be, these new tariffs in place, I would imagine it's going to become a trickier and trickier prospect for the White House going forward as we see kind of all of this compounding. And I wonder sort of how the White House is thinking through that, if there's a continued adamance here to, again, stand behind these tariffs, which it seems the president and his advisors are willing to do, as all the while look at this war that's continuing to push up prices as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you step back and look at some of the economic strain that both the president's policies with regard to the tariffs and the war has caused, it's become an extremely worsening political environment for Republicans. They expected this conflict to end, to wrap up, and so to speak, by this summer. That's obviously not the case. And they're trying to figure out how to message this, when they're back home campaigning, in places like Michigan, where the president is traveling tomorrow. Surging gas prices, the war is unpopular, and his tariff policy has had a major impact on the state's auto industry. There was a Fox poll, released last week that found if elections were held today, 53% of voters said they'd back a Democratic candidate in their district, which Fox said was the highest score either party has achieved on a generic House ballot in any of its polling since 1996. And that should raise huge alarm bells for the GOP, especially as they're trying to land on a right message about how they're, trying to bring down the cost of living, which is the main issue heading into November. Yeah. And that's becoming, increasingly more difficult as this war drags on.
Gordie, great to see you. Thank you very much. Courtney Subramanian, our White House correspondent, joining us on this Sunday. Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much. You've had a long weekend. Go take a nap, as we told Jeff yesterday. We appreciate you.
The latest round of fighting between the U.S. and Iran sent oil prices sharply higher last week, briefly hitting $100 a barrel.
Gas prices also rising, up 20 cents since last month. Oil futures open in less than 10 hours. So joining us now to tell us where they might go, Mike McGlone, senior commodities strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. All right, Mike, look into your crystal ball. What are you expecting from oil prices next week?
Yeah, that's a tough one based on what's going on in the Gulf. If things get worse and there's more offensive capabilities and offensive actions from Iran, obviously expect oil to go higher. But I think the key theme is we have seen a decent couple of years of trading in oil so far this month or this year, and it looks like it's getting near the upper end of the range. So crude oil above 80 kind of gets to be an area that creates a lot of crushes demand and brings in all that supply from the U.S., which is the incremental supplier. And you're seeing the situation in the rest of the world. So I think the bottom line for oil is, what can Mr. Trump do to make it lower by midterms? And with that average price of gasoline around $4.11 now, that's a problem. He needs to do something about it. The question is what he's going to do. So I don't see crude oil staying too high for too long. It's just a question of what's going to make it go lower.
Do a little armchair psychology for us, if you would, about what's going to be going through the minds of central bankers this week. So we got some big meetings. Of course, the Fed holding its two-day meeting this week. We got the Bank of England, Bank of Japan as well. Your sense of how effectively they're able to see through this. We were just having that conversation with Courtney about how the length of this war is so ambiguous. What does that mean for policymakers trying to think through the inflationary nature of these energy shocks?
Yes, well, I hope they don't make the mistake they made in 2008 and 2011. ECB did hike when they weren't supposed to be hiking. And I think the Fed's behind the curve a little bit on that. But the key theme is inflation's very high. And it's not just because of oil. That's the key thing I like to point out is the Bloomberg Energy Spot Index right now is the same level as it was 20 years ago. So it's gone up. It's peaked. It's made inflation pick up in the short term, but it's really not a big picture thing. It's more likely to go lower because it doesn't really stay up. The number one thing that's really forcing inflation in this country is the excessive valuation in the stock market. We're running 2.5 times GDP. That means if it moves 10%, that's 25% of GDP. That's the number one force for inflation. In terms of a U.S. standpoint, it's also a number one theme in elections, and that's how things have shifted. Is you boost, try to get the Fed to cut rates to boost the economy, and then nowadays that's bad because it's bad for you in the polls. So I think the Fed has to stay vigilant. The key thing that will help all inflation is U.S. stock market going down. If that goes down a little bit, inflation is going to drop.
Mike, before we let you go, got about a minute left. You know I love to talk about those durable commodities. I know you love to talk about gold. Run us through them. How are they doing? Are people still looking to those as a refuge in a time of instability, or are they suffering just like the rest of us?
They are, but gold and Bitcoin and silver, that mantra is really 2025's trade. What happened is gold and Bitcoin and most metals went up way too much. And the problem with gold right now, it's basically at a 4-decade high versus a basket of U.S. Treasuries, which means it's very expensive. Now, $4,000 an ounce. I think what it usually does in the past, is put in a pretty good peak that's going to last for a long time and might get back down to 3,000 before you see a good foundation.
Mike McGlone, stay with us. We're going to have a little debate here in a little while. We got somebody saying New York is better than Miami when it comes to the economic prospects of both cities, the viability of living there. I understand you're going to take up Miami. Your beloved city of Miami. You're going to be defending Miami in a little debate we're going to have here on the show in a little while. Mike McGlone, senior commodities strategist with Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us on this Sunday. As I say, he'll come back here. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be spirited.
It's going to be spicy.
A lot of people have left New York from Miami. Maybe not looking like it's going to move. I know,
DC too. A bunch of national security folks I know have moved to Miami, which seems odd, but that sector is building up down there too.
All right, we'll moderate that.
All right, speaking of national security, Ukraine's president has said he has proof Russia is helping Iran in its fight against the United States. That's coming ahead of President Zelensky's visit to the White House. We're going to talk about the possible convergence of these two wars. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg this weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Well, after 8 months aboard the International Space Station for his first mission, NASA astronaut Chris Williams has returned to Earth. During his assignment, he contributed to research for new cancer treatments, advanced the production of materials to improve computers and electronics, and even completed 2 spacewalks. Now, Williams, he was joined by 2 astronauts from Russia. The Soyuz spacecraft would have landed in Kazakhstan about 2 hours ago. There you see him being pulled out. Brazilian Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, he's the son of former President Jair Bolsonaro. He was confirmed as the presidential candidate of his father's Liberal Party. It took place at a national convention in Sao Paulo and is a bid against incumbent President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Now, it comes after a chaotic week that was marked by fresh legal trouble and also an uneasy truce with his stepmother. In company news, sources tell Bloomberg Deekseek has told prospective investors in its second fundraising round that it's suspending the deal for now. It comes at days after comments attributed to its founder went viral. He reportedly talked about a reliance on NVIDIA chips for AI developers and China's persistent lag in AI competition relative to the U.S. An investor excitement over memory chip trade, well, that has a bar set high for the Shanghai debut of CXMT. The company, it's set to become the biggest China-listed firm on its very first day of trading after raising $9.8 billion. CXMT, it's actually the world's 4th largest maker of chips that underpin everything from smartphones to even AI servers. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Lisa.
Well, Iran is condemning a recent missile attack by Ukraine in the Caspian Sea. Ukrainian forces struck Russian vessels being used to transport Iranian-linked military cargo, according to President Vladimir Zelenskyy.
But Iran says the attack resulted in an explosion, killing 1 sailor and injuring another. And this attack comes just before Zelenskyy is set to meet with President Trump in Washington later this week. Joining us to discuss the wider foreign policy implications of both these conflicts is Victoria Coates. She served as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump and is now the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Welcome back. It's so nice to have you. I want to read you a tweet from Zelenskyy yesterday. He says, since the beginning beginning of July, we have recorded active Russian satellite surveillance of the Gulf states and U.S. military facilities located there. It seems like he's gearing up to make this argument to President Trump when they meet in Washington. What is your take on this nexus between Russia and Iran possibly providing intelligence support?
Well, Christina, David, good to be with you. No, this is a very interesting development. We've all been very focused on Western Iran, on that bordering onto the Persian Gulf, the energy flows that come out of the Gulf. But there's also the north of Iran, up against the Caspian Sea, as you said. And that is where the Russians have been shipping in additional support to the Iranians. And the Ukrainians have decided to strike this. They've been quite active in the Caspian throughout the 4+ years of war with Russia. So not entirely surprising, although, I mean, Russia's stretched pretty thin, so I don't know how much they have to send, but very interesting to see Ukraine now proactively start to take a role here.
You know, I'm very curious just sort of about the state of play and your read on it when it comes to the broader conflict in the Middle East and certainly what's happening with Iran. And I'm going to quote from something you said here to The Hill, I think a little while back, about these negotiations that were taking place. You called them a waste of time. And as we kind of look at this administration weighing what to do next, whether or not to increase the kind of military action that we've seen, find other ways to get Iranians back to the negotiating table, which they seem reluctant to do, what is the path forward as you see it? If that memo of understanding didn't create the kind of environment for constructive conversations, what's it going to take to find some sort of solution here to this conflict?
No, I think the economic pressure is ultimately what's going to resolve this, David. I mean, you have an economy in Iran, which is saying it's on life support is a very kind way of putting it. The rial is approaching 2 million for $1. It was 30,000 10 years ago, so that gives you some context for that. Their stock market still isn't trading normally. It hasn't since March. Unemployment's estimated around 35-40%. They may have lost as many as 3 million jobs. And so you look at those metrics and the kind of ongoing pressure from Operation Economic Fury that Secretary Bessent initiated, it just can't go on. So I think the combination of incremental military strikes and that very heavy economic pressure will eventually bring the regime to the table. I sort of think about it a little bit like the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They go on until they can't anymore, and then suddenly you have an end to the regime. So we'll see what happens, but that to me is going to be the metric that I'm watching most closely going forward.
I mean, but that's an argument that has been made for a while, and we still haven't seen whatever the Persian equivalent is of Swan Lake playing on state TV. There does seem to be a really high threshold, as we were talking earlier about, for that regime to absorb pain and to absorb that economic hardship. However, there's a Bloomberg's analysis from Friday that quotes former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia saying that they don't think Iran wants endless escalation. They can absorb a lot of pain, but it doesn't serve their interest to have so much infrastructure destroyed. And that makes me want to ask about what else there is left to target. We have these reports that the U.S. is running low on interceptors. They are also running out of purely military targets. What is the cost-benefit reward there of starting to target more civilian infrastructure, the things that Iran would need to rebuild if indeed it did do that in a democratic way at some point, and wanting to decimate the regime and take out whatever it can?
Well, Christina, you're absolutely correct that the regime is pretty much unlimited in the pain it will inflict on the Iranian people. Bear in mind, they're the ones who are absorbing this. The regime itself is pretty well insulated from the woes of everyday Iranians. But as you said, the civilian infrastructure, so-called, is essentially what's next. And bear in mind, in Iran, most of and what we would consider to be civilian infrastructure is controlled by and exploited by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the more extreme element of the Iranian military. So these are all what you might say are dual-use facilities. And the president up until now has been very reluctant to strike them because he doesn't wish to inflict additional pain on the Iranian people, unlike their own leadership. But that may be what it takes, particularly around Tehran, where the inhabitants of Tehran have pretty high expectations for the services that they receive. If you start to, impede their ability to provide water, electricity, that kind of thing to the inhabitants of the city, you might have a really bad problem. So not a step anybody wants to take. It may be a step that the regime forces the administration to take.
I want to quote something here from the New York Times just about the thinking of the president at this moment about where things go from here when it comes to Iran. By late Friday, Mr. Trump appeared to temporarily put aside the bigger bombing plans, apparently persuaded at least in part by his military advisor's assessment of dwindling supplies of munitions to defend American troops in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE. A major attack would most likely have drawn a heavier Iranian retaliation. Victoria Coates, you bring a unique perspective here. You worked for this president. You saw him wrestle with foreign policy decisions in the past. And I'm wondering about the way that he can change his mind, how he thinks through issues like this one. I'm struck also just by the way that his tone, his tack toward Ukraine has changed in recent weeks. We saw him in a much friendlier form with President Zelenskyy at the NATO summit, the G7 summit before that. How plastic is his thinking when it comes to foreign policy? How resolute is he? And sort of what do you make of the way that he seems to be in real time considering these different outcomes or different paths forward?
Well, President Trump really is not an ideologue in these kinds of issues. He's very much, I mean, the principle of America first is what guides his thinking. And so it's not so much, what did we do last year, the year before? It's where are the opportunities right now? And so it makes him a very dynamic thinker on these issues. He very much is looking for opportunities, the unexpected. I remember saying to him at one point, you've given us a tremendous amount of leeway as policymakers because nobody knows what you're going to do. It could be anything. And so it tends to put our foes on a little bit of a back foot because, you can sort of assume, oh, he's not going to strike. He's concerned about interceptor levels. And then that's when he does it. So I think we should all be prepared to be surprised in coming hours. It's going to be a very interesting week in Washington. We have the funeral of Senator Lindsey Graham coming up, I believe, on Tuesday. So there's going to be a parade of foreign dignitaries coming through Washington. Again, that is an opportunity. And I think Senator Graham would be the first to urge the president to take advantage of it, that folks are showing up in person. He can have a lot of these meetings one-on-one and see what might be possible. But very interesting if, as we were discussing, Ukraine starts to play a more active role in the Iran war. That could be something that comes out of this.
It does seem like a fitting way to honor a senator who had a lot of reach internationally, that all these leaders are coming into town and will probably be at least trying to have an audience with the president.
Ear of the president, yeah.
Exactly. I want to play you some sound, speaking of Ukraine, from President Zelenskyy, talking about his relationship with President Trump from, of all people, Laura Loomer.
It seems like the relationship has greatly improved. Is there something that you could share with the viewers about maybe your conversations with the president?
You are right. The tone has changed. Absolutely. We had first changing moment in Rome, in Vatican. Yeah. Yes, it was not long meeting, but I always said that is, I think, historic moment because we changed the relations during 15, 20 minutes. So nobody was around us. We've been only two of us. And I was very happy to hear President, and I hope, and I was, and he heard me, and I heard him. And I think it was, let it be between two of us, but it was very good.
The evolution of Loomer and some other MAGA influencers this week going from being vehemently anti-Ukraine to, in some cases, in her case, apologizing for past remarks, going to visit the president, and now saying, they are on Ukraine's side. I'm wondering if President Trump is swayable in the same way, how much influence he takes from people like Laura Loomer and how much influence he takes from other allies and even some members of the Republican Party who have been trying to get him to be more supportive of Ukraine. What are your expectations out of this meeting?
Well, again, I think this is a situation where the president's going to look for an opportunity. And I look at the last 18 months. I think, we had that very fractious meeting in the Oval Office at the beginning of President Trump's second term. But I think that actually had a very beneficial effect. I think President Zelenskyy went back to Kiev and said, gee, this is a very different United States. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. And that's when they started escalating this drone production that's been so successful for them, the long-range attack drones. And I think that NATO also got the message from President Trump, you guys are going to have to do more. This isn't as much as it takes for as long as it takes, which is a bumper sticker, not a strategy. So he was right to get rid of that approach. But at the same time, it really galvanized our European allies to start doing a lot more. And that has really moved the needle going forward. And I mean, I don't know Laura Loomer. I wouldn't take my national security advice from her, but I think it is interesting, success attracts interest. And the Ukrainians have really changed the momentum on the battlefield. Hopefully, this has an effect on Putin. The Russian economy is also suffering fairly significantly. And when he starts to take some damage to the core industries that fuel that Russian economy, that will put some pressure on his oligarch friends, that is what may actually change his decision making, get him to the negotiating table to come up with a deal that's acceptable to Ukraine and Washington, not just dictated by Moscow.
All right, Victoria Coates, thank you so much for your perspective. Again,
Greatly appreciate it,
Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump and now the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Just interesting to think about the importance of this funeral this week and sort of what it marks. I mean, for somebody like Victoria Coates at the Heritage Foundation, Lindsey Graham played such an outsized role in Republican foreign policy for such a long period of time. I imagine there's a lot of introspection there and across the city. Sort of what does that loss mean for that party's foreign policy?
And also before that, the loss of John McCain. You know, those two were hand in hand for so often, and it's going to be interesting to see where that leads everyone.
All right, as mentioned, Miami, known for its sunshine and beaches, and now for its high cost of living, higher than New York for the first time. We're going to break down the numbers coming up here on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Two of the greatest outfielders of their generation and the best power-hitting second baseman in MLB history will have their day in Cooperstown today. We're talking about Carlos Beltran, Andrew Jones, and Jeff Kent. They will officially be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That takes place this afternoon. Well, to golf now, where the 3M Open enters its final day of play in Minnesota. Topping the leaderboard, 21-year-old Jackson Koivin at 20 under par, and he's followed by a two-way tie in second between Ben Coles and Emiliano Grillo at 17 under par. Well, pop singer Katy Perry, she is speaking out against the Trump administration for using her song Firework in a social media post without her approval. The video posted on the White House TikTok account, well, it shows footage of military attacks with the caption, Iran has been warned. Now, in a post on X, Perry wrote that using her song to soundtrack destruction and violence is a complete violation of everything her song stands for. And it's a final day of Comic-Con in San Diego. The 4-day event, it's the nation's largest comic and pop culture convention. It includes celebrity panels, studio reveals across comics, movies, television, and gaming. Each year, hundreds of thousands of fans, well, they gather dressed as their favorite characters.
Honestly, my main motivation is just seeing the smile on people's faces when they see someone it's like the joy when you're a kid and you see a character that you like, and seeing someone play as it just brings joy. And I like doing that for people.
Now, in case you're wondering, who is he dressed as? Because that was my question. That is Thrag from the Invincible series. Thank you, producer Ryan, because I had no idea who that was. Remember earlier, guys, I told you
Ryan,
about...
that's a deep cut. I can see him across the studio. Well done, Ryan. All right.
Whoa,
Hold on. Remember I told you about a Wonder Woman picture I did at Comic-Con? Okay, it wasn't Wonder Woman. It was Supergirl.
Supergirl.
The interwebs have found the photo.
Amazing.
Well done.
Behind the globe at the Daily News building. Go figure.
Lisa, you look so cute.
Wonder Woman, that was a different Comic-Con.
Yes.
So, yes, I've done it multiple times.
Multiple costumes, apparently.
Multiple costumes. But, yes, that was the local news days in the Daily News building.
Amazing.
I know it's not the same person, but it's very Lois Lane.
Yes, very
Thank
Lois
you
Lane.
very much. It was very fun.
Thank you, Lisa.
Gotta love
for
Comic-Con.
that and for the update. And for the first time on record, the city of Miami, the metropolitan area, more expensive than greater New York City. I'm going to repeat that again. Miami, more expensive than New York City.
For our radio listeners, my face is not buying
Stupefied. With South Florida's consumer price index jumping 36% since the year 2019. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, Miami's cost of living has surpassed New York's with private school tuition, insurance costs, and restaurant spending higher than they were 1 year ago.
All right. For more on how Miami allegedly got so pricey, we're joined once again by our resident Miamian.
I think that's the right demonym.
You can correct me if I'm wrong. Senior commodity strategist Mike McGlone. Mike, you used to live in New York,
You've
right?
made
Are
the
you one of
move.
these people
Yeah.
who defected to Florida? What is your take on all this?
Well, the bottom line is from the top down. In New York, if you get a $100,000 bonus, the state of New York and the city of New York off the top take 16%. In Miami, it's 0.
Okay.
That's an unstoppable force. So everything else is kind of catching up to that.
Okay, but there's other, I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
No, you go ahead.
No, just say there's other costs associated with living with Florida. Like our reporter found, you got to think about things like property insurance, and also you have to have cars, and you have to have multiple cars because you can't get around anywhere else. And if you're trying to be cool, you're probably spending a lot on those cars.
You're getting a nice car.
Aren't there all these other little expenses that add up?
Well, I think you nailed it there. If you're trying to be cool, it's expensive. But if you're like me and just try to go under the radar and you commute on a bike to the office that's 9 miles on bike pass, it's ideal. You don't have to pay tolls. You don't have to worry about traffic. And you get to look at all those people sitting in traffic and say, yeah, sucks to be you. I'm good and I'm not in traffic. But the key thing is, bottom line, though, it's the weather for 6 months of the year is nice. But one thing I think is really happening in Miami is, and I've noticed, it's really catching up. Obviously, there's the traffic. But one thing I've heard from a real estate standpoint, it looks like we somewhat peaked here and starting to head lower. And I had lucky enough, Bloomberg let me come here in 2021. And the thing is, we're expanding, but the bottom line also from our standpoint is this is where a lot of sales are. We're getting more and more sales there. And the reason is things like Ken Griffin County is because the tax treatment's better.
I look here at the cost of insurance, a huge consideration as well because of hurricanes there. And in this piece, the highest home insurance premiums in the nation, an average of $8,292 last year. That's according to Insurify estimates. Mike, I know you're very familiar with Coral Gables and South Miami and Pinecrest, all the high-tone neighborhoods in Miami.
He bikes around all of them.
Bikes around the property.
I do.
But what are your observations just about how much property prices have skyrocketed here? I saw an analogy in the piece here that if you're buying one of those houses on a square foot basis now, it is kind of comparable to what you might pay here on the Upper East Side in Manhattan.
The quote I heard from a prominent real estate person, I heard his quote was, if I could short Florida real estate, I would. I think it's very peakish. And one thing you also notice, the construction cranes are everywhere. I noticed that I travel a lot lately to Chicago and Philadelphia, and there's no construction cranes, but here they're everywhere. And that's usually a classic sign of a peak. So I think we're near very peak type activity. But also key thing is, remember, Miami and Florida kind of leads the country. If it starts heading lower, it's a high beta. The rest of the country heads downward. But for now, it's also summer. It's not the time to be here. When the weather gets bad, like it did last winter in New York, people flock down.
The snowbirds will flock down, Christina.
I mean, I'm kind of arguing against myself here as I look at some of these numbers because having just moved to New York from D.C., which I thought was a fairly expensive city. I grew up in Colorado. The price of things here has just really caught me off guard. But when you look at what Miami is now charging, I mean, the CPI in Miami has jumped 36% since 2019. When you look at, home falls, this article says until recently, if you moved, like Mike did, from New York to Florida, you could expect this huge windfall from selling whatever your property here was and investing it down there. But that's getting harder and harder to do because you're getting premiums on these Florida real estate. The one thing I will say, though, is you get more square footage still in Miami for the price. And if you are trying to afford New York, even if you own your place, you are still paying these astronomical condo fees. I mean, I know somebody who owns their place outright, but their condo maintenance fee is like $5,000 a month, which is insane to me. Is that still the case in Miami? You still are not dealing with homeowner fees? Well, homeowner fees, yes. But I mean, Mike, form words. I'm clearly not forming them. But what's your take on that? Is it still better to get an apartment in Miami? It's cheaper, or it's not?
I like the year-round factor. I can live by a beach and commute 9 miles, and year-round I don't have to wear boots and a hat and gloves all the time. But one thing that happened right away, anecdotal, is I did get hit with assessment the first we moved in, partly because of what happened in Surfside. Fully expected that. But now it's where do we go from here? And I think the thing is we've leveled out. And the bottom line is, where's the migration? Most that's happening in this country, it's not just New York. I'm, actually originally from Chicago. It's a migration away from high tax states towards lower tax states. To me, that's an unstoppable force. It looks like Miami somewhat's probably peaked for a while at such high levels.
Mike, let's talk about food. In this piece on the terminal, there's a great line. It's either Carbone or a Cubano, that there's not much in the way of kind of mid-grade options here when it comes to food. So as you've kind of navigated your new city, do you find that to be true? Have all the ancillary things kept up with the building of residential towers and commercial towers?
I think so. I have never had a problem getting good food at a decent price. Now, everything's gone up, but I guess I'm kind of lower end. I don't wait in line at restaurants. Typically, if I have to make a reservation, my wife does that. But no, I'm good with that. I haven't found a major difference, and it's just I don't find that much difference. It also depends on your level. Like if you're not trying to be cool, which I'm not, I find no problem with the food.
I love that you ride a bike. I would not have had that on my pegboard for you. I'm wondering, it is a fun story, but I'm wondering what this rise in gentrification is almost the wrong word, but these high rises and this higher standard of living in Miami.
Urban growth, yeah.
Urban growth. It has done we're talking on a very high end here. I'm wondering if this is putting the squeeze even more on medium income and lower income families and communities that make Miami kind of what it is.
It certainly is. One thing that's fairly cool in Miami that I actually love is I am a gringo in many parts of Miami. I mean, the first language is Spanish. Now you go to Fort Lauderdale, the first language is English. But I do enjoy that. I enjoy the multicultural environment, but it's getting much harder for your average person. If they don't own a place, if they own a home that's from 20 years ago, those homes have gone up a lot. But if you're just renting, they're starting to fall behind. It's getting more and more difficult.
Our senior commodity strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence, very self-effacing. I've learned a lot about Mike.
I have too. I think you need to come up to New York and we can hang out and learn more about Miami.
Mike McGlone, appreciate you playing ball with us here as we talk about that story again. Just fascinating to see how that's changed.
It does seem like almost any urban area, though, is just getting more and more expensive. There are very few affordable cities left, I think. All right, stay with us. Bloomberg This Weekend continues right after this. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura. All right, we already know a lot about Jeffrey Epstein's network of power brokers, politicians, business leaders, and celebrities. But a new Bloomberg analysis sheds light on a different network. That's a shadow network of modeling scouts and fixers who lured girls and young women into Epstein's orbit and brought him to them.
Epstein's travel operation was enormous, involving more than 3,700 commercial flights. Bloomberg senior editor Peter Guest is on a team of Bloomberg journalists that analyze flight records and other documents. We spoke to him earlier.
When we started looking into this, we were aware that Epstein had clearly built a network that enabled him to recruit women from all over the world that could then be brought to his properties. But it wasn't really clear who those people were. We had sort of victim testimony saying that some people have been brought in through the modeling industry, others have been brought in hired as assistants and so on. They came from all over the world, often Eastern Europe. So what we did was to look for the evidence in the DOJ files as to who those people might be. Now, among those, they were people that we have already had named, I think, in some of the testimony. They were model scouts. They were people who were broadly attached to Epstein's wider network. Some of them potentially knew the circumstances that they were recruiting people into. Others potentially didn't.
It was surprising to me how much of it seemed, at least on the face of it, to be kind of, I don't want to say above board, but through normal commercial routes, right? These are commercial flights. This is a normal type credit card. These are hotels, not, safe houses. There was a way to track this, but it's only come to light kind of afterwards. One of the things you write is he recruited victims from the same country where he cultivated political influence. That implies, experts said, that the shadow organization was only possible because of the protections and privileges that Epstein received from his elite contact and status as a billionaire. Can you talk broadly about how that might have worked?
Sure. So what we're looking at when we mapped out how the flight network worked and where the flights were coming from and going to, these were flights often booked for women in Eastern European countries, or in some cases Brazil and other kind of countries where the power networks that he had cultivated probably gave him a sense of impunity, right? If he is moving in circles that include some of the most powerful people in that country, it is very difficult to then come forward and challenge him. He was also able to operate above board purely because he was just booking these flights, or his staff were booking these flights through commercial services, and nobody appeared to be looking at it systematically and saying, okay, well, there's a pattern emerging here. It's a question of whether they should have been looking for that. But when we kind of extracted these flight records from the DOJ files and we mapped them out, and we showed that pattern, we showed where the flights were coming from, where they were going to, how they were being booked for third parties and so on. Pretty much all of the experts we spoke to immediately said, oh, I recognize that. That looks like an organized crime network.
Wow.
What did we learn through this reporting and analysis about the way that he used modeling agencies? So you mentioned he was an investor in modeling agencies. How did he kind of lean into that to advance his objectives here?
So in some senses, he didn't have any formal role in the modelling business, but he had links to people within the industry. And as far as we're aware, he invested in another modelling agency called MC2, which has been part of probes in France and other places. So I think through that, he was able to sort of bring himself adjacent to people who were already engaged in a business that fundamentally recruits young women, and young people, but principally young women, and then puts them into situations which, often leave them somewhat vulnerable. So I think what we could see through the files is by putting himself into that world and by interacting with people who were also in that world, he was able to get access to people who he could then bring into his orbit for abuse.
What do we still not know about this network, about this travel, or what documents are you still missing?
Well, look, we are very limited in our ability to say definitively how many people have moved through this network, how many people were involved in it, purely because the names of victims have been redacted. Many of the victims also seem to sort of be brought into the network and have a kind of complicated role in it. So whether they were purely victims or victims and in some way accomplices was also very murky and difficult. And we also will probably never find out how many people knew what was going on. The majority of people who we will speak to will deny any knowledge of what was happening. We don't know who knew what and when. And also, we only have access to what was directly being booked through his credit cards and his offices. We only know the kind of half of the conversations. We don't know that below these networks, there were other networks, other individuals, people moving money, people moving women, people potentially offering women as grimly products for other people. So we don't know a lot, but what we do know is the shape of it. And from that, we can, I think, derive an idea that maybe this was much bigger than we originally thought.
On that note, let me ask you lastly, just to situate what this analysis, this reporting tells us about the broader story. So as you've said, we know in broad strokes a lot about what he was trying to do and indeed did. When you look at these flights, 3,700 flights, and the graphic representation is extraordinary just to see the uptick of that after he got out of prison. What is the main takeaway or the main takeaways that you have, that you want readers to have of sort of what he was doing, what you've added to the story here of how he was living his life?
I think the main thing I would want to take away from this is that the patterns that we saw are familiar because they keep on happening. And the fact that this is somebody who left jail in 2009 and was able to build this network, was able to operate with relative impunity for a long time. And bearing in mind, when he was arrested in 2019, it was not for any crimes that he had committed after 2007. So he was continuing to do this essentially in plain sight. The question I guess I would have, and I would want people to take away from this, is that where else is this happening?
All right, Peter Guest, Bloomberg senior editor, joining us from London. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much.
We're coming up on 9 a.m. in New York.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now. Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, a second straight night without U.S. strikes on Iran, as the White House is reportedly concerned about the size of its weapons stockpiles, new details, and the impact on rising oil and gas prices.
And 100 days to go until the midterm elections. Democrats hoping to win back the House and Senate this November with the focus on a key matchup in Maine.
We have a party to unite, we have a movement to build, and we have a senator to defeat.
And ever feel like you need a vacation from your vacation? The new trend for luxury getaways, making sure you get plenty of R&R when you're out of office. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We're coming to you live from Bloomberg's headquarters here in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini with Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, July 26th. We've got a lot of headlines for you this hour, so we're going to start right away with Lisa Mateo. We have
Officials in Germany, they are now offering more information about the suspect who they say drove a van into a crowd during Berlin's LGBTQ plus parade. Now, they say he's a German citizen and may have used a machete. Now, the German Interior Minister adds that signs point to an Islamic terror attack. One person was killed, at least 16 injured. Hundreds of thousands of people had come to take part in Christopher Street Day. That's one of Europe's largest LGBTQ celebrations. Also in Europe, French firefighters, military crews, they continue to battle those fast-moving wildfires in southwest France. As shifting winds, they actually drive it into new areas. French military personnel, they're supporting relief operations alongside healthcare workers assisting evacuees. More than 300,000 people, they've been displaced in parts of France and also in Spain this week. And those fast-moving fires, they've had an impact on the final day of the Tour de France. Today's stage 21, it will now be shorter, about 55 miles down from just over 82. Now that's due to a lack of security officials who've been deployed to fight the blazes. The 113th edition of the race, it lasted 3 weeks, starting on July 4th in Barcelona, Spain. Well, from wildfires, we take you to a typhoon. Typhoon Newell has made landfall today in southern China, bringing strong winds, heavy rain to the region. More than 70,000 people have been relocated. Also, over 300 emergency shelters set up. Classes, work, production, transportation, and businesses have all been suspended. And back here at home, Maine Democrats officially picked Troy Jackson as their new U.S. Senate nominee. That's after a previous pick, Grant Plattner, dropped out. Jackson spoke to the crowd at a special convention in Bangor.
There is a place in this campaign for all of you. There is work for you in this movement. And I will spend every day, now through November, earning that trust.
Jackson is a fifth-generation logger and former Maine Senate president. Jackson will take on a 5-term Republican Susan Collins. She's held her seat even though GOP presidential candidate hasn't won Maine in nearly 40 years. Well, to the war in Iran now, where the U.S. has paused its almost 2-week run of strikes against Iran for a second night. And that's raising further questions over President Donald Trump's war strategy. The New York Times reporting that President Trump and his advisors are concerned that the war could drain the stores of Patriot anti-missile interceptors and other air defense weapons in the region. But tensions, they are still high. That's near a global energy choke point in the southern Red Sea, and that's due to fighting between Yemen's Houthi militants and Saudi Arabia. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much for that update,
Lisa.
particularly the stuff on Berlin there, a big story here this morning that we woke up to. Well, this morning, the New York Times, as Lisa mentioned just a moment ago, reporting on concerns within the White House about another escalation with Iran that would put U.S. and Gulf allies at risk. Excuse me.
That's right. The Times is reporting that President Trump could be holding off on a larger strike, in part due to a low supply of anti-missile defenses. Now, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, is on NBC right now, or will be soon. It looks like this was a pre-recorded interview, pushing back against that report, saying the U.S. has all the equipment it needs. So, to help us break this down, we've got Becca Wasser, she's Bloomberg Economics Defense Lead, and Chris Kennedy, he is the lead for Economic Statecraft. Becca, I want to start with you because I know you've been covering this stockpile and its depletion and where we are with these numbers. How real is the concern over the defensive missile supply for the U.S.? It seems interesting, if these reports are accurate, that the U.S. is now prescribing policy based on the integrity of the supply.
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting inflection point where right now in the course of the conflict, there is a huge strain on U.S. air defense interceptors. That's not to say that the U.S. does not have any left, but rather that there's a clear strain on the existing stockpiles, which are running low after, this extended conflict with Iran, in part because of the sheer need, not only from the United States, which is trying to protect bases and troops and some U.S. allies in the region, but also the allies themselves, who have depleted most of their air defense stockpiles and have been asking the United States for more. So at the end of the day, it's a pretty stark place to be in, but it's not necessarily the only thing that is dictating U.S. military policy. We've seen this song and dance before, where President Trump has threatened high escalation only to step back at the last moment to leave some room for diplomacy. We've also seen President Trump enter into feints in the past, where he's said that there will be no strikes, only to go ahead with that large operation. However, from my experience, if I'm looking at things right now, the U.S. does not have sufficient defenses to weather the blowback that would likely come from Iran if the U.S. were to rapidly and extremely ramp up this conflict.
We'll get to Chris Kennedy here in just a minute, but Becca, one more question to you as I look at your most recent piece for Bloomberg on all of this. You write, the U.S. lacks the munitions depth to bomb Iran in perpetuity. The bigger risk is the U.S. may run low of the right kinds of missiles. Help me understand what we know and what we don't know. My understanding is the size and scale of these arsenals is classified. We have some sense of what the U.S. has. How blind are we when it comes to kind of assessing what the U.S. has at its disposal?
We're pretty blind, but I think there are a few different rules of thumb that we can always rely on. We've seen, at least in the initial fighting during Operation Epic Fury, U.S. officials said that there were over 13,000 munitions that were expended, and most of those were some of these higher and long-range missiles that are in demand all over the globe. And so the U.S. is likely having wound down some of its stockpiles for those critical munitions, which means that it is either likely going to need to pull some of those missiles from other regions like the Indo-Pacific, which could leave a potential gap for others to exploit, or try and find ways to bolster the production of munitions, which the U.S. is doing, but that's a slow-moving effort. We are talking months, if not years, to try and just produce a few more of some of those most advanced missiles and munitions.
Wow. Chris Kennedy, thank you for hanging in there. We do want to ask you more about the economic impact of all this because oil hit $100 a barrel for the first time in weeks. We now have concerns not only about what's going on in the Strait as this seems to drag on and just the cost of doing business with this level of instability, but now you have these threats from the Houthis, which is compromising exports not only in the Red Sea, but possibly production within Saudi Arabia. You know, they can and have before hit refineries and facilities there. What is your take on that second front and if we're going to see that, if we have seen that start to price in the markets?
Yeah, so it's definitely a challenge. So the Red Sea is now, been the subject of several different attacks by the Houthis. I just looked at the recent tanker traffic through the Red Sea, and it is dropping over the past few days. Of course, many ships might be traveling without their transponders on, so it'll take a few days to really see what the impact has been on traffic. But we are getting anecdotal reports about ships turning around, having to traverse the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, and that just adds time to get oil to market. On top of the Middle East conflict, we've also seen Ukraine ramp up its attacks on Russian oil export infrastructure, tankers. And so that's another bit of pressure that's been growing in the background as this conflict has continued.
Becca, you gamed out sort of what the president and his team might be thinking about when it comes to the future of this war. And you came up with three options. The U.S. could continue to bomb Iran, could intensify the blockade and guidance of ships, or could launch an operation to forcibly reopen the Strait of Hormuz. I wonder if you could kind of put those in order of likelihood as you see it, maybe order of difficulty as well, and where you think the administration might be headed right now.
I think the administration is firmly in that first bucket. They're looking at ways to potentially intensify the air war, to launch additional air and missile strikes against Iran, because that's the playbook that the president has relied upon. But at this juncture in the conflict, the president is starting to feel pressure where he probably needs to do something different, in part because some of those economic pressures that Chris has mentioned. So if that's the case, there's, the two additional options. One would be to try and enforce the blockade even further. But really, with that, try and make it so that the U.S. can get more ships through the Strait of Hormuz, which is becoming even more of a choke point than it already was. That means that the U.S. military would need to shift to a direct escort mission, which is something that is incredibly resource intensive and may not necessarily be on the table at this point in time. And then the last one is a operation to open the strait, and that requires putting boots on the ground in Iranian soil. It is high risk, it is resource intensive, and once that happens, the escalation in this conflict is likely to go sky high. And that's where the conversation that we've been having about air defense interceptors is so important, because those troops would need to be protected as best possible, as well as other U.S. forces and allies across the region. In addition to that, the U.S. could also potentially look at entering the fray in the Red Sea. That would further overstretch U.S. forces and assets, particularly some of those air defense missiles, too.
Chris, we also have another front that is really impacting the price of oil, and that's the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Russia, and how Ukrainian drones are penetrating Russian defenses and getting to hit these manufacturing and refining facilities. But now also you have reports potentially of Ukraine going after an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. Everything is connected when you look at global economies, but also when you look at politics. And as the economic statecraft lead, those seem to fold in nicely together. What is your take on how these two conflicts are antagonizing each other and working together to kind of make it at a hard time for oil prices kind of even more difficult? Where do you see this going?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, the Iranians did not respond well to Ukraine's targeting of this particular ship, which I believe Ukraine said that it was involved in the transfer of weapons between the two countries, Russia and Iran. I do think what we're seeing is this pressure building on the global energy system. So just stepping back, the U.S. publishes weekly updates on energy inventories, oil inventories. We're probably going to see a 16th straight week of oil stocks falling in the United States. We had a little bit of respite from this MOU period. We saw commercial stockpiles rise a little bit, but these releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve have continued unabated. So we're estimating that those releases will essentially run out by October. It's possible the U.S. could offer another release. But these stocks are limited. And so the additional pressure, Russia has banned the export of diesel because of these attacks. Russia historically has provided about 10% of the global exported diesel supply. So that's a pretty significant hit. It hits the real economy everywhere. Another unknown is how long China can continue to effectively pause many of its oil imports. And we don't really know what's going on in China, but they've certainly helped to act as a buffer for the global energy system over the past 5 months by essentially dropping off 40% of their imports from the world. So there are all of these different variables. Some are uncertain. Many of them are outside of the control of this president, certainly, and they're going to be adding pressure to his decision making.
Becca, I'm listening to Chris. I'm still stuck on something you said, which is about the U.S. kind of engaging with the Houthis, and my mind wanders back to April of 2025 when we saw the U.S. do that, and there was that moment when I think a Super Hornet fell off the USS Harry Truman into the ocean. It was a difficult fight that they were waging there, and I wonder sort of what that portends about the U.S. kind of re-engaging in that way. How difficult would it be for the U.S. to fight the Houthis who have kind of reared their heads here several months into this conflict?
That's a great question. Let's think about what happened last time. You mentioned that there were aircraft that rolled off the deck of a carrier and were lost at sea. But there was also over 1,000 U.S. airstrikes on Yemen at that time, which ate into munition stockpiles. Additionally, U.S. air and naval forces shot down over 480 Houthi drones, and that left stockpiles pretty low for some of the important air defense interceptors as well, with U.S. Navy officials saying that they cost in the billions of dollars and that stockpiles were nearly depleted. And that was just from some of these one-off attacks from the Houthis during that time period. Right now, if the U.S. were to enter the fray, it would be like that once again. But that also means that that's occurring at the same time that the U.S. is prosecuting a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and using munitions and equipment and readiness to, conduct that, as well as continuing its air campaign against Iran, which is been paused for 2 nights, but could pick up at any moment, which again is depleting critical readiness, using U.S. forces, and using up some of the most important munitions that the U.S. might need in a potential future conflict.
And Chris, it's not just complicating supplies of munitions and oil, but other commodities as well. I see you retweeting a friend of the show, Stephen Shasinski, who we had on yesterday, him talking about LNG. He said a global fight for LNG is brewing and Europe is losing. Europe's strategy of delaying LNG purchases until Hormuz reopens is backfiring, threatening efforts to refill storage for winter. What is going on there and how critical is this?
This is a really serious issue for Europe. Of course, the U.S. is in pretty good shape for LNG. And if we could export more, but we're really capped out at how much we can export right now and help to backfill for Europe and other economies. I think the challenge right now is that Europe is competing with Asian economies that are also trying to ensure that they have sufficient supplies of LNG, which goes into everything from power generation to petrochemical manufacturing. So, Europe is in a position where they need to start, resupplying their stocks before the winter. They can't count on Russia, of course. And there's limited amounts of export from the U.S. So, if this conflict doesn't resolve, if we don't get these LNG, supplies coming out of the Gulf again, it's gonna cause some pain in Europe. And I'll also note that we saw early in the war that Iran targeted some of Qatar's LNG facilities, and these are very sensitive facilities. And if they are subject to significant, kinetic attacks, that could cause, long periods of them being offline. So that's, I think, one of the bigger risks of further escalation at this point.
Chris, we only have a couple of seconds, but before we go, is it we can't export more because we lack the trains or the facilities to convert it into a movable quantity, or is it shipping, or where's the rub there?
It's these export facilities, so these LNG export terminals.
Okay.
So between now, in the next 5 years, we're expecting to be able to double our export capacity. But right now, the U.S. is drowning in LNG, and we just can't get it out fast enough.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Two of my favorite people at Bloomberg Economics. That's Chris Kennedy, Becca Wasser joining us this morning. Becca, the defense lead at Bloomberg Economics. Chris, the economic statecraft lead. And whenever I'm in the D.C. bureau, always fun to wander over to their
Massively
row of
smart
cubicles.
department.
Yes,
Thank you guys
absolutely.
so much.
Thanks again.
All right, up next, we're going to take a closer look at Russia's role on the world stage. The author of Vodka Politics is joining us live in studio. David, I just finished this book this weekend. We invited its author to come in. It's really, really fascinating take about how vodka has played a role for generations in Russian politics and the functioning of the state. So stick with us.
Yeah, before we go to break here, a look at the week ahead. A busy one. Monday, the Gordie Howe International Bridge opens between Detroit and Canada. On Tuesday, second quarter earnings from PayPal. And on Wednesday, the big event, the Fed's decision on interest rates. Stay tuned to Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio for more throughout the week.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. The Philippines, Japan, and the U.S. have completed their latest round of joint defense exercises in the South China Sea. Now, in a statement, the armed forces of the Philippines, they said the three countries had deployed naval vessels and aircraft as part of the drill from July 21st to July 25th. China's People's Liberation Army, they said the exercises, quote, damage regional peace and stability and has organized air and naval forces to patrol the South China Sea. Now, in company news, investors' excitement over the memory chip trade, that has the bar set high for the Shanghai debut of CXMT. The company is set to become the biggest China-listed firm on its very first day of trading after raising $9.8 billion. And sources tell Bloomberg Deekseek has told prospective investors in its second-run fundraising round that it's suspending the deal for now. It comes days after comments attributed to its founder went viral. He reportedly talked about a reliance on NVIDIA chips for an AI development and China's persistent lag in AI competition relative to the U.S. And after 8 months aboard the International Space Station for his first mission, yes, NASA astronaut Chris Williams has returned to Earth. Now, during his assignment, he contributed to research for new cancer treatments, advanced the production of materials to improve computers, also electronics, and yes, he even completed 2 spacewalks. Williams was joined by 2 astronauts from Russia. The Soyuz spacecraft had landed in Kazakhstan just a few hours ago, but he is back on soil. David and Christina, we'll send it over to you.
Fascinating to watch those pictures. I mean, they're unable to walk.
Correct.
Yeah,
Good point.
gravity is a powerful force.
Reclamation is real in Kazakhstan.
I feel that way on Monday.
Right. Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Russia, famously known for its vodka and its culture of extreme intoxication. But just as vodka is central to the lives of many Russians, it is also central to understanding Russian history and politics.
That's right. In the book Vodka Politics, Alcohol, Autocracy, and the Secret History of the Russian State, author Mark Lawrence Schrad explores original documents and archival evidence to analyze how vodka is hardwired into the Russian political system. And Mark joins us now live on set. You are also an assistant professor of political science at Villanova. We are so happy to have you here. I stumbled across this book a couple weeks ago. It's absolutely fascinating, but you preface it by saying this is not about an ugly stereotype. This is not, and that's almost led to why people don't dive into how much of an issue this has been for decades. From czars to Medvedev, people have tried to tackle this problem and come up short. What's going on here?
Right, and thank you for having me.
Of
This is a fascinating topic, and obviously something that's observed a lot of my time since I was a student back in Russia in the 1990s when the economy was in the tank, and just living there for a long time. You're just like, okay, well, there's something about this stereotype, and we've all heard this stereotype, but then you're sort of living it. And you're like, okay, there's a lot of alcohol going on right now, a lot of vodka, and so I kind of wanted to hammer at why, rather than just sort of avoiding the unpleasantness, diving into it, and a lot of the times it's just prefaced as some sort of cultural stereotype. Oh, Russians just love it, and they don't, right? I mean, it's not like they're just like sipping a vodka and then going, oh, what a great aroma. No, they're having a hard time choking down just like anybody else. But actually, I think it has to be more of a legacy of political and economic decisions that are at the heart of autocratic statecraft, kind of putting the financial interests of the autocratic state ahead of the well-being of their own people for generations upon generations, through the czars, through the Soviets, and unfortunately straight on through the present day.
Explain that a bit more. So the level of consumption is huge, like 15 to 16 liters per person per year, I think is what I read. So people are consuming an incredible quantity of hard alcohol. In another country, that might be seen as kind of a public health issue or concern. There it's not.
It was. So during a period of time between, Putin's first 2 terms, and then there was that interregnum where Dmitry Medvedev swapped positions for 4 years.
Briefly, yes.
Well, one of his big initiatives was an anti-alcohol campaign because he acknowledged that this is horrible. This is decimating our society. It's decimating our ability to field troops. It's decimating our tax base, and all those sorts of things. So they tried to clamp down beginning about 2009 on alcohol consumption, using what I would say are fairly progressive policies, informed by public decision or by public health professionals around the globe, and very incremental approaches, very well thought out. Little did he know, though, perhaps, that on the other side was that his president, Vladimir Putin, had actually been buying up and taking control of, personally, a very large percent of the Russian vodka market. And so a lot of those public health initiatives ended up focusing in on putting higher taxes not on vodka, but on beer, which is lower alcohol, probably better than quaffing vodka.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's just completely upside down. So even the public health initiatives were pushing more vodka on people, which is just bizarro land. It's topsy-turvy.
But that almost kind of fits with what you talk about in the book, and that's throughout its history, kind of due to the way this was set up with grain production and with the advent of the tavern, vodka was used as a tool of the state. It was a big financial boon. Can you explain how that works? I mean, so much so that Tolstoy was a teetotaler, which I didn't know, and the Bolsheviks were vehemently anti-booze because it was such a weapon of the state.
Right, and this is something actually is not just, it started, my interest started in Russia, but kind of expanded out globally in subsequent research, but it's fascinating how many people throughout history, including American history, are noteworthy prohibitionists.
Yes.
So Tolstoy, Lenin, in the United States, Frederick Douglass, I would say, Abraham Lincoln, you could say Thomas Jefferson was America's first prohibitionist. So it's fascinating because ultimately the key to understanding sort of that anti-alcoholism, and you definitely saw it in the autocratic regimes in Russia, was that this is how and it didn't take like a rabid Marxist to point this out. This is how the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And so it was very easy.
You couldn't trade for it, right? You had to pay for vodka in hard currency.
Right. You had to, and it was strictly forbidden to make your own outside. This was part of the Tsar's monopoly on the tavern trade. And so the tavern keepers were known as Seitz-Wald, which means the kissers. They kissed across to vow that they would not dilute, that they would not interrupt the revenues of the state that were going to the Tsar. And so they were sort of the main interference points, or point of interface, I should say, between sort of Russian society and the Russian government. And that's, essentially how you paid money into this whole system. So.
You wrote this book before Russia's first incursion into Ukraine, and some years have passed since then, and here we are in the middle of this war, and I'm curious through the prism through which you've written this book, sort of how you're looking at this current conflict and the difficulty that we've seen reported that Russia has kind of fielding its army to continue to fight this war. Through this lens, what can we glean or what can we learn just about the kind of state of the conflict itself and the way that they're able to recruit people to fight in it?
Right, and it's been interesting to kind of sort of watch it through that particular lens. In the early years of the conflict, the Donbass War in particular, you had the Euromaidan revolution in Kyiv, and then obviously the annexation of Crimea and the sort of this low-scale war in the Donbass region. It was a sort of a study in contrast because the Ukrainian side, which also has afflictions with alcohol and sort of the vodka as part of that historical trajectory, but also has a lot more sort of European cultural influences, historical influences from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the areas around Lviv and so on. The protests that were going on there were very orderly. In fact, they had areas that were self-policing in terms of making sure that we have sobriety. We don't want anything going wrong here. By contrast, the sort of inauguration of these rebels republics in the Donbass region by these pro-Russian separatists were just drunken bacchanals, and you had reporters on the scene reporting how everybody's drunk, everybody's falling apart on these sorts of things, and so it was kind of an interesting contrast. It's like, all right, we've got it very clearly here that these are not the same protests, and they're bringing different sort of historical baggage in those cases.
But at some point, I mean, it impacts the functioning of the state, because when you look at a military, it's got to impact readiness. And when you talk about historically, even the function of the Soviet state, you write about these insane dinner parties that Stalin used to have, in which he used to insist his ministers, who had work to do, would stay very late into the night. They would fake drunkenness early so they could try to go home and salvage the rest of their day. Talk about the work of this as almost a statecraft and an internal monitoring system, because what was the goal? Getting people drunk enough that they would spill their secrets, or they would tell them if they were a spy?
Yeah, there was certainly an element to that, and I remember.
David, don't do this to me. I'm not telling you my secrets if we go drinking. I don't know.
Yeah, no, like the opening snes of the movie Death of Stalin. I don't know if you've seen
That's kind of what I was thinking as I was reading the book. Yeah.
When I saw that movie, I was like, did they read like the first chapters of this book? Because it was, but literally, I talk about it in the book. It was like like a frat party with the devil. I mean, he's forcing everybody to drink with the intention of maybe divulging some secrets if they were secretly plotting to overthrow, sort of loose lips sink ships kind of thing. So there was kind of this idea of keeping one's potential opponents off base, whether that's or off base a little bit, whether that's in the Kremlin, but also if you want to project that out in terms of sort of state-society relations, there's something to be said about keeping the people sort of drunk and off base and unable to sort of mount a challenge to your own authority in that way. So it works a little bit both ways.
In the last few minutes we have here, let me just take advantage of you being a scholar of Russian politics and just to ask you how you're thinking about or viewing Vladimir Putin at this moment in time. I think there are a lot of folks who see him as maybe getting closer to having his back up against the wall, and I'm curious, looking at that kind of in the complement of history, how you're thinking about him in this moment.
Yeah, it's it's weird. I can't claim to have a direct line to Vladimir Putin. Sure. And I'm very suspicious of anybody who does claim to have that. But one of the things I constantly notice, especially in sort of Western media coverage, is this notion of I'm calling it it's like a village literature on sort of the beginning of the end of Putin.
Interesting.
And I wrote a piece, I think, for Foreign Policy a number of years ago, kind of tracing these, and I was finding beginning of the end of Putin. Stories going back to the Kursk disaster in 2002. So, you can go all the way back. Oh, COVID, this is the beginning.
Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Exactly.
Second time we've used that this hour. But
but I think my position was always like, well, as a betting person, you can always say, well, this is the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the end. Well, every time you're going to be wrong, except for once. So it's better to be and take the opposite approach and say, this is probably not the end of Putin. And that way you can only be wrong once. Which is the one way to look at it there.
But as you look at the drivers that have fomented change in the past, what finally gets it to that breaking point? There's so little opposition left in that country. Even if Putin falls, what replaces him, and could that be worse?
Right, and that's the key, I think, to a lot of this, is that I think we take, especially in the West, we kind of project our notions of popular sovereignty. The sovereignty lies with the people, and then we have to keep the people placated, at least, some degree of public approval, maybe not, expressed through, direct democratic initiatives or whatnot. But there still is that sense that, well, if we can't push the Russian people too far or else they're going to rebel. I think we've passed that point where that sovereignty is linked to the will of the Russian people. So nowadays you're seeing these lines of cars, lining up, queuing up for gas, and now the attacks on other ones. And everybody's just saying, well, where's the Russian people's breaking point? I don't think the Russian people are going to break anytime soon.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. The book is Vodka Politics. Mark Lawrence Schrad, thank you so much for driving in. We appreciate it.
And coming up here, we're going to look at that new bridge opening up between the U.S. and Canada. That metaphor, a bridge and a metaphor, coming up next here on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Pope Leo is speaking out about the devastating wildfires in France and Spain, asking the faithful to pray for those affected and for the rescue workers. A wildfire in southwest France will force the evacuation of 55,000 people overnight on Sunday. More than 300,000 people have been displaced in parts of France and Spain this week. In sports, a big day for baseball fans as the Hall of Fame's 2026 class is officially inducted. Carlos Beltran, Andrew Jones, and Jeff Kent, they will have their day in Cooperstown later this afternoon. A record 60 Hall of Famers, they're expected to be in attendance, including Football Hall of Fame quarterback Troy Aikman. To golf now, where the 3M Open enters its final day of play in Minnesota. Topping the leaderboard is Jackson Koivin at 20 under par, followed by a two-way tie in second between Ben Coles and Emiliano Grillo at 17 under par. And while there's a heat dome expanding across the central U.S., Chile's central Andes, well, they received some much-needed snow. One of the Santiago metropolitan area's most popular mountain destinations. It's been suffering from weeks of limited snowfall, but yes, that recent storm, which actually brought flooding and landslides to some areas, it left more than 6 feet of snow in the Andes. Yesterday, that popular destination recorded full capacity attendance. Brings me back some memories.
Wipeout, that's me anytime I get anywhere near.
For those listening on the radio, massive wipeout on a snowboard, and then I love the guy in the ski lift with the giant bottle of Chilean wine.
No notes.
Just tipping back.
You can't go home without it.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Canadians are celebrating the opening of a new transnational bridge that connects Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. The Gordie Howe International Bridge, named after Mr. Hockey himself, officially opens to cars and trucks on Monday.
That's right, but U.S. officials didn't participate in that opening ceremony, marking the completion of the $4.5 billion project, which has been in the works for more than a decade. It has also become the subject of President Trump's ire. We spoke to senior White House correspondent and in-house Canadian Josh Wingrove about it. Talk to us about this bridge. When does it open? When does it fake open? And when can you really start driving some cars across it?
I mean, it felt like this day would never come, really. It had its fake opening ceremony on Friday. The Canadians held a Canadian-only event celebrating a little bit of road hockey, as you'd imagine, being played on that. The official commercial opening comes on Monday, and this has been a long time coming. I mean, this bridge dates back more than a decade in terms of planning and wrangling and arguing over who will pay for it. This is typically the most important trade corridor in North America in terms of trade volumes. Of course, Michigan known for its auto sector, connecting it to the part of Canada that has its auto sector. The number of tractor trailers that go back and forth is just substantial. And until now, it's been one privately owned bridge, the Ambassador Bridge, that's been the only route in particular for those trucks. There's a tunnel, but trucks can't fit in the tunnel. And so they've always wanted a second bridge, in particular one that offered a second option to this privately owned existing bridge, and that's what brings us here today. But obviously it's just gotten caught up so much in the wrangling between the president and Canada. He seems to really have a bee in his bonnet over the Canadians right now, and so we saw that sort of, that lightning found the pole of this bridge to try to sort of upend the deal, and that's what led to this opening being delayed. And so on the one hand, finally it's opening, but on the other hand, Prime Minister Carney had to cut a deal and give Trump a slice of the pie to get there. And so it's a bit of a moving target and indicative of the fraught times that they're in terms of Canada-U.S. trade.
As this current president, we're going to get back to the metaphorical nature of this in just a minute, Josh, but as this current president is fond of pointing out, this is a bridge that was started under President Obama back in 2012, I believe. Describe the need for it, why this has taken so long, and sort of how it's different than the Ambassador Bridge you mentioned just a moment ago.
Well, it's a bit of an engineering marvel. I mean, as you know, I'm an engineer. I'm not at all. I have no expertise in this, but people keep talking about that. They wanted this just for redundancy and for, added capacity. And the initial debate that went on for a long time was who would pay for it. Trump likes to say, obviously, that it came in under Obama, but let me also note that it came in under Prime Minister Harper, a conservative prime minister, Canada's last conservative prime minister, most recent one. And so there is bipartisan consensus in Canada and in the U.S. about this, including with Michigan. And that original deal is between Canada and the state of Michigan. The U.S. government is not a part of it. So they finally struck a deal in 2012 to build this thing. And the deal was Canada would front the money. They would finally build it. And through toll revenue, Canada would get repaid. And once that happened, Canada and Michigan would split the profits or split the revenue or whatever. That is the deal that was leading into this. And Trump, of course, didn't like that and wanted a cut of the pie. And so the thinking here is that having a brand new bridge and a second option offers guarantees in a region that carries just so much traffic that, God forbid something would happen or maintenance requirements or God knows on the Ambassador Bridge, that there would be another option to keep trucks flowing. Of course, one big question, not only for traffic on this bridge, but for the region's economic development more broadly, is what the auto sector is going to look like in the future, not only in Michigan, but on the other side of the border in Ontario. Trump is wanting to reshore a lot of production of autos and auto parts from Ontario to Michigan. Canada, of course, looking to defend its auto sector. Where that is going to land, we don't know. And how that lands will substantially impact what kind of commercial traffic is flowing across this border. But for now, this bridge, like I said, is a sort of a widespread, bipartisan support in Canada, seen as basically a no-brainer up there, so much so that the country agreed to swallow its pride and front the money for it. And that's what made President Trump's sort of intervention at the 11th hour all the more frustrating and even insulting to many of the Canadian officials who worked on this project.
Josh, the thing I'm confused about is the president issued a tweet or a Truth Social or whatever the verb form of that is now.
I love how we say issued a tweet. Issued.
Truth Socials. I don't. You know what? That's about enough. An
edict. Sorry. All right.
Stop it. Basically saying that they've changed the deal so the U.S. now gets 50% of the profit. But that's not, it's the net profit that they're getting. And my understanding is, doesn't Canada have to pay itself back first? So how is this fundamentally different from the original deal?
If you've been watching the Canadian news, which I know both of you do very closely, there's been much made about this, and the Prime Minister's been in hot water over how he's described this. But the way to look at it is that there are two deals. There's the original deal, Michigan and Canada, and then this new side deal between Canada and the U.S. And Carney was sort of bouncing between the two a little faster than might have been clear, and Trump is referring to the side deal. So the initial deal remains in place. Not a single thing has been touched on it, and that deal sees Michigan get half the cut once the Canadians are repaid. But what Canada has agreed to do is for 15 years, a number that Trump left out of his truth, pay half of net proceeds after operational costs to an American Regional Development Fund with some sort of joint input on what it invests in, but controlled by the Americans. And that's where we landed on this. Now, for Carney, I think it's fair to say he views this as essentially a low price for certainty in a project that opens, but also that creates a structure that kind of incentivizes continued development in the region in a very modest way, obviously. But Carney's saying, look, more traffic means more development, means good for everyone. And so he's sort of downplaying the Canadian concerns from critics who are saying, look, you gave up, you made a concession to President Trump on this. What gives? He's saying it's very marginal, that early on there will, in fact, in his estimation, be no profits to split, and that the profits would sort of ramp up over the years and towards the end of the 15-year agreement. Whereas for President Trump and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who led the push on this from the American side and even delayed a planned opening in the past, their argument is, well, look, we had nothing before and now we're getting a slice of this, and isn't this great? This has been separate from the overall trade talks, but, as we sit here on Friday, the president was going after the EU on trade. He's got these new tariffs. Everyone's not really sure where things are landing, and he's talking about, tearing up this deal, which didn't really happen, to get a better deal on the bridge. All this is sort of just continued uncertainty that I think will fuel questions about how strong deals made with the Trump administration are. Trump keeps arguing that other people are breaking these deals, but his opponents in other countries, or the people on the other side of the table of them, can't help but think that it seems like he moves the goalposts quite a bit on these things. And so what we have here is the two side deals, but fundamentally the bridge is opening, and Carney looks like he was willing to cut off a piece of the pie to make that happen.
Our Canadian-born senior White House correspondent, Josh Wingrove. Josh, thank you very much.
You can't tell that Josh is Canadian, but I feel like in that segment, for the first time, I heard a couple Canadian-sounding O's, Josh. I don't know if those were for emphasis or whatever.
It wasn't deliberate.
It's going to be interesting. I'd love to go up and see that bridge.
Yeah, it looks spectacular.
Michigan's fun in the summer.
True, I've heard that. I haven't been.
I haven't spent enough time there.
All right.
It should be great.
Making plans. Speaking of vacation.
All right. You ever need a vacation after your vacation, or maybe even during your vacation? A travel expert shares her tips to maximize your days off.
You can take us with you no matter where you go. Watch us on Bloomberg TV. Listen to us on Bloomberg Radio. You can stream the show at Bloomberg.com or on the Bloomberg Business app. It's Bloomberg This Weekend. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura with Christina Ruffini, Lisa Mateo. More luxury travelers enjoying the benefits of 2 trips in one. A little bit of action and then some time to unwind. These are called multi-destination journeys or split trips.
All right, I guess that makes sense.
Okay.
Bloomberg's Hannah Howard writes about how this phenomenon, she writes about this phenomenon for Bloomberg Pursuits. Lisa and I sat down with her to talk about what exactly this means and if it could be good for your vacation.
Hannah, I have to tell you, after reading this article, it reminds me of me. After a vacation, I'm like, I need another day. Do you ever feel like that?
No, I'm always the annoying person on vacation who is like, what do you mean we're just going to sit at the pool? We could sit at the pool back home. Like, there's a castle over there. Like, let's go climb the hill. Like, I am an activity vacation person. I'm very annoying. Hannah, where do you stand? And is sanity somewhere between us?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I used to be just like you, and then I became a mom. And now sleep is number one on my list of priorities, and relaxing by the pool used to seem incredibly dull, and now I cannot think of anything better.
Well, I have to ask, so these high energy destinations, okay, because you split it, right? You have the high energy, and then you have the recovery time for this. So I know high energy, I kind of did this on my own. Like, it was like, okay, guys, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to do scuba diving, we're going touring, we're doing this. And then the rest was like a beach day. So what's considered the high energy part of it?
And is there an order you should do it in?
Yeah.
Well, there's the perfect order is the one that feels right for you. But what's inspired this story for me was a sort of accidental perfect order. So I was on a trip to Cartagena in Colombia, which was super beautiful. And it was also one of those high energy, nonstop, so much to see from early in the morning to late at night. And I stayed at this beautiful Sofitel Santa Clara right in the San Diego Plaza. So out my window, there were like street dancers and people drinking cocktails.
Yeah, I'm about
night.
to sever this connection if you keep talking about this vacation I haven't gone on. But continue telling us about this lovely trip.
Yes, it was great. And then I headed on a boat to Baru, which was the opposite. It was just a beautiful beach in the middle of nowhere, and there was nothing going on, and in a fantastic way, nothing to do. And this contrast proved incredible. So it was what sparked this story. And I didn't do it intentionally, but I thought, oh, this is a really great way to do this trip, to design a trip, exactly like vacation from a vacation was what I was thinking. And so I asked a few people if they had this in mind, and there definitely seems to be these two kinds of trips. Someone called it a working trip and a vacation trip. So like the hustle, get as much done, pack as much in, FOMO energy sort of trip. And then we've done all that, and now we need to just be horizontal and recover and rest. So I think the perfect trip involves a little bit of both.
I think this makes sense because I just feel guilty. I feel like I haven't seen enough of the place or, gotten enough out of my vacation if I'm not doing things, but then I do go home a little bit exhausted. So I feel like this is a good approach because if I had it scheduled out, to your point, and you'd already done all the cool things, then I would feel justified in having a leisure day or a spa day or something like that. Are there people who prefer the flipped arrangement where you relax first and then bang out all the cool stuff?
I'd say the people I spoke with averaged to be about 50-50 in each camp. Yes. Okay. So I definitely talked to people who said, first we need to unplug, unwind, do nothing, and then we have the energy to run around and see all the things. And then other people felt the opposite way, that before they go home, they need some of that quiet time. So I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, but I think for me, I like to get all of my sightseeing and energy out and then just lie there.
Well, how much time does this take? Because it seems like it would take 2 weeks. I mean, for people who don't have the 2 weeks vacation to take, can you do it in a week? Can you do it in a few days? What's the time frame for this?
Absolutely. My Colombia trip was 2 days in Cartagena and 2 days in Peru. So there wasn't a ton of time at all in this trip. You can, if you have the luxury of doing this. I spoke to people who spent a week in Venice and Florence and then went to an Italian beach resort. So it could go either way, but you don't need 1 million vacation days to pull off kind of this 2-part split trip.
Do you need like $1 million? I mean, is this going to cost you so much more if you're doing multiple destinations?
You don't even need $1 million. There's so many different ways to do it. I'm thinking about some more local options of like DC, and then Delaware Beach was one of the places we talked about. There was a let me think. There was a lot of kind of local, like a Charlotte city trip followed by some really great beach time. So you don't have to go around the world to pull this off.
All right, Hannah Howard, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to look into Cartagena. That sounds lovely.
Me too. I'll join you.
David Gura, do you do this when you travel?
My agenda is set for me by
Really?
other members
You
of the
have no
family.
say.
And I have very little say. I do enjoy just vegging out.
Okay.
But do you
might
do the
expect.
action first and then the veg
Do a
out?
little action, some
Okay.
hike or other physical rigor. I'll do that. How about you? I can imagine you doing some rigor. Hiking.
That's the most David Gura way of
Parasailing? What are we
phrasing,
doing,
like, let's
Lisa?
do
What
something
do you got?
active.
I am not. Next week, I'll be sitting on a softball field in the rain the whole week. Salisbury, Maryland.
Sounds fun.
I'll do
You guys will be
Sounds
so
very
funny.
Maryland.
My
Wow.
spa is very close to your softball game, though, so if you get bored and you want to defect, you should just
Thank
drive over
you.
to the spa. It'll be great.
Thank you. I could use it.
All right. I think that'll do it. Thank
Yeah.
you for joining us on Bloomberg This Weekend. Be sure to tune in Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time for a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, The Fed Decides. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura with Lisa Mateo. We will be back with you next weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. The Shah Hussein Show is next right here on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.